Good evening, everybody. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education of Bernards Township. Notice of the time and place of this meeting was provided, and copies of that resolution were forwarded to the official newspapers as designated by the Board of Education and to the Township Clerk, and a copy of the notice was posted on the bulletin board of the Board of Education offices in accordance with PL 1975, Chapter 231A. The rest of the public notice is posted online, and it's in the handouts there. I will just point out that there will be two opportunities for public comment. The first public comment will be public comment on agenda items. The second one will be public comment on whatever's on your minds. So with that, can I have the roll, please, Mr. Rilla?
Mr. Salmon?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
Ms. Light?
Here.
Ms. Hira?
Here.
Ms. McCune?
Here.
Mr. Molinari?
Here.
Mr. Amin?
Here.
Ms. Chipak?
Here.
And Mr. Rascio?
Here. That will bring us to our student representative, Petra Effenbaum.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here tonight. Ridge has crossed the threshold of 100 days with only about 90 days left until the school year is set to end. This current marking period will be ending on Tuesday, April 4th. On the 15th, Ridge Chorale had their Stars Nights of Singing, where they sang women's empowerment songs. I heard it was very passionate and a wonderful night. Tri-M, the Musical National Honor Society, performed a Sounds of Spring performance for students during the lunch block, which was also spectacular. This coming Wednesday, you can watch them sing music of the movies, so be sure to get your ticket. 9 students placed first at the ESCT Terrier Classic and the TOC Speech and Debate Series 3 2 weekends ago. As well, Ridge Speech and Debate was named state champions for, I think, what is the 21st year in a row. Manan Pandley, Natalie Ramirez, Kevin Lee, Dia Jane, Andrew Kui, and Pranav Mahesh placed first in their respective events. Ridge Track and Field hosted its annual Are You Faster Than a Ridge Runner race, which went off spectacularly. The Devil's Advocate is seeking new writers. The Feminist Club hosted a bagel fundraiser last Friday and will be doing so again this week. Key Club is holding a clothing drive until May 13th, so be sure to drop off clothes before then. Class of 2024 mattress fundraiser was held over this weekend and was an extreme success. As well, Ridge will be hosting a hackathon soon. Now, nominations are open to submit people to the Ridge High School Athletic Hall of Fame. You can check this out in the Last Friday folder if you are interested in submitting any names. Ridge Girls Soccer will be playing at Red Bull Arena over the summer. If you are interested in going to this event, tickets are available now. The Ridge dance team killed it on Sunday at Groove Dance Competition, where the large group hip-hop routine won a plethora of awards, including first overall in their division. The boys golf team has their first match tomorrow. Boys lacrosse has their first game on April 3rd. Boys tennis will have their first match on April 4th. Boys volleyball has their first game on April 4th. Girls golf has their first match on April 3rd. Girls lacrosse has their first game on April 4th. Softball begins on April 3rd. Baseball begins on April 4th. Ridge Track and Field placed 3rd in the 4x8 relay, and Brendan McMahon placed 10th in the 32-meter at, I believe, the Meet of Champions. Amanda Chinelli recently placed a Ridge record in the triple jump. Owen Mays also broke a school record in both the 55-meter hurdles and the 60-meter hurdles. Patrick McCaffrey also broke records at the 200-meter dash. Mays, Dede, McCaffrey, and Duran broke a record in the sprint medley. Unified Sports has their Champion Cup for basketball in Princeton next weekend. Good luck to them. Once again, students at Ridge are hard at work, so make sure to celebrate their accomplishments, big or small, and cheer them on as they continue to do amazing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Any questions for our student representative? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to board president's comments. I'd like to start off by welcoming Mr. Rollo back to the district. We're all looking forward to working with you. I'd also like to thank Beth Brooks, who was the consummate professional when she filled in that role for the last 2 months. So thank you to Beth. I also, a bit of a delayed thank you to Gene O'Connell and Allison Reed for arranging for Mr. Salmon and myself to view the CPAP program a couple weeks ago. I learned a lot. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and just seeing the aides and the teachers with those kids. I mean, listen, if there's anything that's the definition of good work, that's it. And it was something to see. I appreciate the opportunity to see it. I do want to correct a couple of misstatements on 2 matters that were recently referred to in the Burnsville News. One was regarding the minutes of the Finance Committee that were compiled by Ms. Light, and they were distributed to the full board the Thursday prior to last Monday's BOE meeting. So I do want to set the record straight on that. As well as there was a comment in the paper regarding the administration being instructed to eliminate a curriculum mandate. That was never the motion that was passed. It was to have the mandate modified, and now it was delivered. Regarding last week, I think we should talk a little bit about the meeting last week. I think we can all agree that no matter how anybody feels about the motions that were passed, how we arrived at the end result can be improved upon. There's a topic, board governance, on the agenda tonight, and it's under board forum. I think it's worthwhile for both new and old board members to hear it, and I'm looking forward to a productive conversation there. Again, in regards to last week's meeting, I think proper parliamentary procedure and decorum, they both slipped a bit. I think we have to be able to disagree and debate, sometimes vigorously, while adhering to both. Speaking for myself, I believe in processes. The board has to follow its own policies. And if those policies are not working properly, then those changes should be discussed in the policy committee, then brought before the full board. And that is how the majority of board actions should originate. That's not to say that pressing or exceptional circumstances might not necessitate a motion to originate and be voted on during a BOE meeting. Last week, the budget had to get passed. It had to go in, period. That made for a pressing circumstance, for the subsequent motion that was passed. It was something that had been discussed, not with the full board, and that was a failure of communication that we'll work on to improve. But it was not a violation of policy, law, or ethics. Let me state my views, and I'm speaking for myself, on board legislation. I support the majority of board initiatives, policies, motions going through regular channels. Barring exceptional or pressing circumstances, I will personally find it difficult to support a motion that does not go through these channels, even if I agree with the merits of that motion. I'd also like to point out that the vast majority of the work the board has done this year has undergone regular channels. Questions of curriculum that we've tackled have been discussed in committee. The work being done on our athletic fields has been discussed in committee. The staffing of special needs aides has been discussed in committee. So it hasn't been without bumps or growing pains, but however, the work of the board has gone on this year. There's some who are going to argue that, it's not the way we've always done it. That's not relevant in regards to policy or law. That's more of a cultural board norm argument. And norms and culture, they change, sometimes slowly. This year, perhaps more quickly with the large turnover in the board. Change is uncomfortable. However, change is here, and I think it'll be reflected in some ongoing conversations that we're going to have this week and in upcoming weeks regarding committees, meeting minutes, communications, just to name a few topics. Whatever we're talking about, we should strive to set a standard of healthy debate and collegial discussion, even when we strongly disagree. The tone for this district starts at the top. We should set that tone because the students and the kids are watching. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Markarian.
So thank you, Mr. Molinari. We did not talk about what you were going to say tonight. I appreciate your comments very much, and I couldn't agree more that, we do set the example. We have to work together as a team and focus on communication, and for whatever I can do in my part to make sure that that happens as smoothly as possible, I'm committed to doing that. So thank you for your comments.
Okay, that's going to bring us to superintendent's report. There are 2 items. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. McCune? Ms. Light? Mr. McCain?
Thank you, Mr. Molinari. So 2 items. One is our standing receipt of the HIB report for this dated board meeting of March 27th. The second item is our post-secondary report. We did link this as a report for the public to review. It's a very lengthy report, and we will be taking a look at that report in a couple of our different committee meetings at the board level. We first took a look at it at the last Wellness Committee meeting, and we'll be following up to finish going through it with board members.
Any questions for Mr. Markarian? Okay, can I have a motion? We have a motion. Can I have a roll call vote on the items?
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Chipek?
Yes.
And Mr. Rashio?
Yes.
Okay, that's going to bring us to public comment on agenda items. Please come forward, state your name and address, sign in, and this is public comment on agenda items. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Victoria Costa, 15 Hilltop Road. I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Better? Okay. My comment is in regard to the HIB report. I've been diving through last year's 18-page Code of Conduct School Safety Data Report. I've also seen a lot of rumors going around. Mr. Markarian, I know you've been a fan, or not a fan of rumors, I should say, and so I'd like to dispel a few things. We've been hearing that there's been a 300% increase in HIBs at WAMS. This was given by Ms. Hudak in a November meeting, is what I was told by several sources. Now, I was not there myself. I'm not a fan of rumors. I've tried to get facts, so I'd like some facts. I've dug through the 18-page summary. I hope with the HIB report that you've received tonight, I hope that you could expand on this in many ways. It's supposed to provide a summary and statistics, and honestly, it really only provides statistics. It's a 5-year look from 217 to today, but 2 years obviously were because of COVID. In the elementary school incidents, Cedar Hill has 118 incidents, which is more than double the amount of any school. I'd like to know if anybody's checked what's going on with Cedar Hill. Mount Prospect, I'd like to give kudos to those parents and those school teachers, administrators. They come far behind with 24. Physical aggression seems to be in the top 3 of all the grammar schools. I'd like to know what we're doing about physical aggression. I'm assuming, it doesn't say in this report, but I'm assuming that HIB investigations come out of the incidents reports. It's really not clear. The middle school doesn't really have as many as I thought they would. They have 83 incidents as last year's report with 10 HIBs. I'd like to know also what constitutes other. There's a bucket that says other. Some other categories like graffiti, vandalism, weapons. Sexual incidents is a juvenile crime. I'd like to know if the cops are called in when instances of that occur. I'm looking at the high school, and 2/3 of the incidences are late, tardy, and cutting class. So I think that's astronomical to have 67% late and tardy. I don't know if I'd call late and tardy an incident for a high schooler. Where do these kids go when they cut class? I know if I don't make a meeting at work, people come look for me and track me down, so I'd like to know that. There's 4 main themes besides the late and tardy being number 1. It's academic integrity, insubordination, dishonesty, and disruptive behavior. I could tell you a lot of these are normal high school attributes. I reviewed them in entirety. I could say that the school bus incident is counted twice, so it's really not 517 incidences, it's 513. When I see something counted twice and in buckets right on the page, it makes me wonder if the rest is really correct. I would really hope that we would go back and verify and double check. We've been conducting these reports for 5 years. I'd like to know what metrics and programs there are for working at these HIBs, how they've done. I can see that the majority of severe, should I say, punishment as suspension, in-school suspension, suspension and after-school detention and Saturday detention. I'm a little old here. I could say I haven't been in grammar school since 40 years, but that's kind of like an old kind of thing. What are we doing new and transformational to help these kids? Thank you.
Hello, board members. My name is Suzanne Schaefer, Dawn Drive. I am speaking today about the agenda item under curriculum to approve textbooks. At the March 1st BOE meeting, Mr. Salmon presented curriculum committee meeting minutes, which included information about the textbooks that are on the agenda today. He said that during the curriculum meeting, There were members of the BOE who objected to the sociology book and shared that the comments objecting to the book were about old studies that were included and that there wasn't, in one particular situation, anything that presented the opposite viewpoint. Then later, during board forum, Mr. Molinari commented that he would never vote for textbooks that he had a problem with. His direct quote was, "I am not going to vote for something I don't approve of, not going to do it." He then invited people to ask him about what he objected to in the books, privately. So I am here tonight to ask that question. As elected officials who are voting on books that affect our district, you all should make your concerns known publicly. What is it that you are objecting to in the proposed textbooks? What is your expertise to evaluate textbooks? Why do you think that your opinion about a textbook should override that of the many educational experts who not only wrote the books, but the team of teachers and supervisors who chose it from among the many books that are available? In the case of the proposed sociology book, the writer, Richard T. Schaefer, who's no relation, received his BA in sociology from Northwestern and a PhD from the University of Chicago. He now teaches at DePaul University in Chicago, which is the largest Catholic university in the United States. Seems like a qualified person to write a book that would contain accurate information and ideas about sociology, which is not a required course at Ridge. The book was reviewed by our supervisor of social studies, Mr. Terry, and our sociology teachers at Ridge, in addition to some students. I do see that this proposed book is no longer on the agenda tonight, and I would like to know why it has been removed from being approved. The AP European history book that is on also went through a similar vetting from our curricular experts, as did the accounting book. In addition, Ms. O'Connell also reviewed the sociology book and recommended it for its accessibility to students with different learning styles and abilities. I would argue that these folks have more expertise at evaluating textbook than any of you do. Your job as a BOE member is to do the best for all of our students. These textbooks, for our upper level students in 11th and 12th grade, would appear to provide great opportunities for critical thinking and questioning, and this is one of the skills we want our students to graduate with. It is important for all adults to be able to question and critically think. Why should we remove this from our curriculum or anything that might require dialogue or thinking? We would be depriving our students of an important opportunity. I'm concerned about the sentiment from our current board president that he knows better than any experts about what is and is not acceptable in the way of books for our students. This is a very slippery slope, and I wonder what is next. Critical thinking is necessary for everyone, even board members. Please use your critical thinking skills when you are voting tonight about approval of textbooks.
Good evening. My name is Joan Bannon, and I live on Patriot Hill Drive. I'm also commenting on the curriculum committee approval for textbooks. I have some questions regarding the approach taken by the board with respect to approval of textbooks. I watched the video of the last meeting where I believe Mr. Rascio said he didn't want to micromanage Mr. Markarian in making budget cuts. And I was hoping that same approach might be extended to the approval of textbooks. I'm concerned because I heard, I believe, Mr. Molinari at a prior meeting object to a sociology text because the text did not speak of advances made by women and only commented on the historical discrimination we faced. I understand Mr. Molinari was mistaken, as the text in question did mention that women made slow but steady progress over time. But in my view, this micromanagement of curriculum committee caused them to spend additional time to select another textbook so that he would approve. Equally and important to me is Mr. Molinari's objection seeming consistent with the ideology of American exceptionalism. Thus, my questions are, for transparency, do any board members intend to use this ideology when approving other textbooks, such as history textbooks, which might focus on the oppression of other groups, such as those belonging to other minorities? And second, will board members continue to micromanage the curriculum committee, or will they adopt the hands-off approach as they have with budget cuts? Thank you.
Anybody else for public comment? Anybody online? Oh, somebody's coming. Oh, sorry.
I come on a different mission. My name is Jean Byrne, and I live at 18 Tanglewood Lane. I have lived in Basking Ridge since 1964. All 5 of my children have attended Berners Township schools, and at present I have 2 grandchildren at the high school. I have always loved living here and consider it a wonderful town with a school system to be very proud of. However, I would like to just put in a plea to watch the new budget, the draft budget, and vote for necessity and not just nice to have. My generation is on fixed incomes, and our real estate taxes are high. Couple that with high inflation rate we are experiencing, many living here are having it very difficult. Also, I have talked to young parents. They too are hurting, as you all are, because of the cost of college educations and everyday inflation. Please be fiscally smart and conservative and think of all the residents of Basking Ridge and those without children, those with small children, and those that are looking at the college expense. Thank you.
Aaron Weber, 15 Hilltop. I want to address some of the things that I've read over the past week in the Burnsville News, various Facebook pages, about the March 20th budget. Most of the board members agreed that the preliminary budget was presented so late that it couldn't really be changed because it had to be filed that night. The superintendent spent a lot of time explaining that this is simply a preliminary budget and that it can be modified before the final budget. The vote was taken, preliminary budget was passed, so knowing that the budget can be changed, Mr. Amin called for a vote to find administrative cuts before the final budget. Over the past week, people have attacked the BOE online, saying they want to cut head count, and contrary to what Ms. White said last week, that, paraphrasing here, that our job is to support the superintendent. No, the job is not to support the superintendent. From the New Jersey School Board Association, here's the role of the school board and the superintendent. The school board has a dual role. One, to present the concerns of the citizens, taxpayers, and parents to the school administrators, and to represent the needs of the students and the school district to its citizens, taxpayers, and parents of the community. The school board does not operate the district on a day-to-day basis. That is the job of the superintendent. Who is the district's chief executive? Rather, school board sets the policies, goals, objectives of the district, and it holds the superintendent responsible for implementing the policies and the achieving goals. My personal biggest frustration with all of this was that a motion to reduce costs had to be called at all. I personally manage a large budget every single year in my day-to-day job. I'm constantly looking for ways to cut costs. No one asks me to do it. It's something that I do as part of my job. Mr. Markarian took a long time during last week's meeting to explain to the board and to the public, paraphrasing here, that if you want him to do something, you have to ask him to do it. In other words, he isn't necessarily looking for ways to reduce administrative costs on a daily basis, unless the board tells him to do so. So why is everybody surprised and angered when Mr. Amin calls for a motion to start looking into administrative cuts before the final budget? Why would we delay looking at cutting costs? If the board doesn't like what Mr. Markarian suggests, they have the option of voting no or to ask him to continue looking. Luckily, our new board members aren't waiting for Mr. Markarian to find new ways to cut costs. In the 2 months that the new board members have been on the job, along with Kirsten, they've managed to save over $500,000 on a drainage issue that has plagued the softball field for years. They've reduced the cost of school lunches. They've prioritized getting all the bathrooms in working order and a new process to minimize downtime. And if something breaks, there's also tackling 1,100 open work orders that have been open in some cases for years. So I have no doubt that these same board members will find ways to save money when it comes time to review the final budget. We should always be looking for ways to reduce costs, and I'm glad we have BOE members that understand that. Thank you.
I will say if there's any more comments on agenda items, please keep to the agenda items. Last two, we kind of like go off that rails a bit. But there is another public comment, so here we go.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Shepard. I live on Loreline Drive. I just wanted to follow up on what a few of the women were asking about the banning of textbooks. I'm just curious, I don't know if anyone will ever answer this question, but do the newly elected members, did you plan to ban textbooks as board members? Was that part of what you ran on? Is that something you disclosed during your campaign that you wanted to ban textbooks? I don't know if I'll get an answer to that question, but I am curious.
Annika Forzani, Don Drive. So I really appreciate, Mr. Molinari, that you put board governance on the agenda tonight. And I really hope that it will address some of the issues that we've seen in the last few meetings. As I mentioned in my letter to you, I've been a resident for 25 years, and it was the first time that I really simply did not feel that our district is being well served with the disorganization and the dysfunction that we saw the last couple of meetings. And again, I bring this up not because I have a personal agenda. I do not plan to run. I just want to ensure that the schools maintain their excellence and that everyone, students, teachers, and administrators, are treated with respect. The chaos we saw, the mixed messaging, the lack of communication between members, they really run the risk of undermining the community's confidence in the board and ruining the reputation of our schools, which ultimately would lower our property values and would also affect all the seniors and all of us in the town. And I think we know that pretty much every single family will tell you that they moved into this town for the schools. So really, really do appreciate any kind of efforts to improve the communications between you and the processes. I will say I have been dismayed to see the board disregard expert advice. Example was what we just heard about with the curriculum and the textbooks. Similarly, last meeting when Mr. Markarian provided, I thought, a very well thought out explanation of the budgeting process and a suggestion related to future analysis. And he suggested his preference to move forward with the preliminary budget as approved and look for additional cuts throughout the year and throughout the 24-25 school year. I didn't like how this was immediately disregarded with the motion and a sort of dismissive comment from Mr. Mean that he works for us, because yes, he does work for you, as do all the employees, but they're hired for their expertise in education. And in my opinion, they've been doing a great job with our highly rated schools. And just like the administration, the board is working for the parents and teachers. So there certainly should be no kind of political agenda, et cetera. I'm also concerned about the sole focus on cuts rather than maintaining the quality of our schools. Look, I'm a business person. I completely understand. Of course it makes sense to continue to look at where we cut and really to prepare a risk management plan over the course of the next year. But the motion that you passed was like immediate, do it in 6 weeks, and I think what Mr. Markarian had suggested was much more reasonable. Of course, no one enjoys paying higher taxes, neither do I, and we should be looking at how to spend wisely. Nobody's arguing against that. But you do have to also plan from sort of the revenue side and looking at cuts that you're going to have to still make. You may not get the percentage of special ed state reimbursements that we did last year. Transportation costs could go up. Healthcare premiums may not stay flat. And you've got teacher negotiations on the horizon. So I really feel it would be a shame if you don't have some wiggle room to pay them in the manner that you all publicly declared that they deserve. So I just am concerned about this focus just on cuts and I don't hear talk about quality of education. That said, I'm happy to see Mr. Salmon's suggestion to start times resulting in lower transportation costs. I saw that on the agenda. But please, just try to learn from experienced members to determine what you can do to ensure maximum reimbursements for state aid. Okay, and I know some of you have good relationships with the town, so maybe there's something we can do about the extra cost for the police officers that are this year. I just think that having a 0% tax strategy won't maintain the quality of our schools. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eva Deffenbaugh, Petra's mom from Valley Road, and I just want to say I'm very proud of my daughter. I would like to thank Mr. Molinari for putting board behavior on the menu, so to speak, because I have found, sitting through these meetings, quite embarrassed that my daughter has had to deal with some of the behavior of some of the people on the board, discourse between themselves and other things. And I think that as board members, I know sometimes you can't control what is said to you from the floor, but you can behave yourself better amongst each other. So thank you very much for putting that on the menu.
Anybody else for public comment? Anybody online? Okay, public comment is closed. Anything you want to address, Mr. Mercan?
So there was a comment about the student safety data report. We typically lag about a semester behind in doing those reports, providing them for the board and the public, meaning this spring we will provide a report for our data so far this fall. So hopefully people will find that informative. There were a couple comments about the budget. Obviously, it is an ongoing process, as I mentioned at the last board meeting, and regardless of where and how the budget ultimately stands at any given point in time, preliminary, final, or otherwise, we are always trying to find ways to manage our budget, make it go as far as possible, and also to generate surplus at the end of the year by looking at savings throughout the year as a whole. That's it. Thank you.
I'll just add one thing. Several people thanked me for putting board governance on the agenda. That was Mrs. McCune's initiative. We talked extensively about it, but it was Robin who initiated that, so credit where it's due. That's going to bring us to approval of minutes. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. White? Mr. Salmon? A roll call, please.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Cheepak?
Yes.
And Mr. Rashu?
Yes.
That is going to bring us to the Finance Committee report. There are 15 items. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Salmon? Second, somebody? Ms. McCune? Finance Committee?
Okay, the Finance Committee met just last Thursday on the 23rd. We spoke about a number of different things. I'm going to go through them one by one. The first was a property insurance renewal. Upon review of the budget, we had some questions as to why the premiums had increased quite significantly. So our provider, our insurance broker from Arthur J. Gallagher actually met with us. Here's the explanation and the insight that he provided. Currently, the district's in year 2 of a 3-year contract. Cybersecurity has been the biggest issue lately in general. We actually are members of what they refer to as a JIF, which is a joint insurance fund related to that. In January, they provided estimates for the budget, and the ultimate goal as the brokers are having their meeting, is to either beat or meet the budget number that was provided in January. About a week ago, our insurance company began to have those broker meetings and released more accurate numbers. They are still marketing and negotiating. However, at this point, each line item, for example, property, cybersecurity, workers' comp, are slightly different than what was estimated in January, but in total was lower than the original estimate provided. So the district should receive the final renewal quote in the middle of May. Workers' compensation was the quote that resulted in the highest fluctuations. Otherwise, rates have been relatively stable. Overall, within the JIF, workers' compensation claims experience has been improving, and that brings the cost down. The rate provided is a blended rate of all the insurance types. However, it's broken out between professional and non-professional staffing. The claims experience in the past has been non-professional staff was very high, and that special education aides drove the rate increase. This year, the property insurance increased significantly due to the worldwide worst property market due to natural disasters, example, fires, hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding. During the broker meeting, discussions of rate increases were in the range of 20 to 50%. A number of districts are underinsured due to the property valuation. However, Bernards Township does not have that issue currently. In July of 2021, cybersecurity insurance prices were increasing drastically due to the move to remote schooling and the increased reliance on technology. In 2022, the premiums were reasonable. However, the deductible was excessive unless the district instituted a multi-factor authentication strategy, which our district has employed. We have benefited from the lower premiums, even though our claims history has not been positive in this area. At this time, there are no further measures that need to be taken by the district. However, the district will continue to monitor and implement actions to mitigate risk. Mr. Rollo has already met with the Director of IT, Alex Blinder, to discuss fortification of our environment. The next item on the agenda was to discuss the final audit results with Withen Company. The deadline to submit the annual comprehensive financial report was moved to March 31st as the state provided new numbers for pension and other post-employment benefit costs on March 6th. A draft was sent to the district last week. The Finance Committee will review that draft and ask any questions, and then the final report will be issued with hard copies provided by the middle of next week, which is this week, starting today. The report must be accepted by the board within 30 days of when the report is received. At this time, the auditors are still waiting on some supporting documentation. However, there are no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in that report. A resolution will be put on the agenda in April to accept the audit report after review and all questions have been answered. We got an update on Aramark contract renewals. A lot of this is actually confidential, so I won't go into detail on that one item. And the item 4 was relation to the motion that was made on the 2023-2024 administrative cost. In general, the business office and Mr. Markarian have already begun to work on this evaluation subject to the motion presented and voted upon by the board on Monday, March 20th. The goal is to come up with some options for the board to consider by late April so that there is time for discussion and decision prior to the final budget vote on May 8th. Some of the initial actions taken were as follows. A review of the Taxpayer's Guide to Education Spending is underway for the accounts in the 230, 240, and 250 cost centers. A review of expenses of similar districts, for example, Montgomery, Milburn, Westfield, Bridgewater, and Hillsborough, is underway to determine what areas we are in line with and where are the outliers. The committee entered into a robust and highly productive discussion on areas to focus on for the future, immediate, and long term. The members that voted in the majority at the meeting on Monday for the motion clarified that the goal was to look at reducing all types of administrative costs and not just reducing the headcount. There was a general agreement that in this cost center there are many expenses that should be analyzed together with the headcount. There is a general agreement from those committee members that were in attendance for the discussion that the district should immediately begin looking at a three-tiered busing model and staggering school start times to not only reduce the cost of busing, but to improve the wellness of our staff and students. There are many considerations that need to be given to this proposal, including but not limited to the contract with the BTBOE, needs of the community such as childcare, extracurricular activities, lead time for the community to plan for any anticipated schedule changes. Additionally, The committee discussed the merits of embarking upon a personnel audit that would accomplish 3 goals. 1, determining the right staffing mix, example, administrators, teachers, staff, aides, et cetera, for the district based on demographics and community needs. And 2, evaluating the duties of all current positions to ensure that the duties are being performed by the most qualified and appropriate staffing assignment. And 3, identifying areas of process improvement, automation, and technology investment to reduce workload for all district staff. The general feeling is this exercise could accomplish the following: inform the update to the long-range capital plan, for example, investment in technology, develop a roadmap to achieve a more sustainable cost structure, 3, inform staffing requirements, and 4, improve staff wellness and staff retention by reducing workload and enabling staff to work in their appropriate area of expertise. The committee recommends moving forward with both initiatives identified for the bus staggered start times and the personnel audit. We recommended that these be put on the agenda this evening for board forum discussion, which you will see tonight. We had the 5th item on the agenda was we had a request from the Ridge hockey team. The Ridge hockey team had requested that the district budget for a larger share of the cost of ice time. The committee discussed benchmarking and desire to understand more about the relative resources of different teams to understand if it would be fair to increase the contribution for ice time. Currently, the general feeling, although some members did not agree, is that there are a wide range of factors that impact the resources different teams have. Some sports like hockey and skiing can have a high out-of-pocket expense, while others do not. Specialized facilities such as those needed for hockey and skiing are factors compared to sports that use school gyms or fields. The committee asked for the new incoming athletic director, once hired, to undertake a benchmarking exercise in order to determine what other schools are doing around this situation so that the committee can discuss this at a future meeting. An initial idea that was proposed by Mr. Rollo, and what he has seen in other school districts, was to have every child that plays a sport pay a fee to help offset the costs of the more resource-intensive and costly sports. Ideas will be explored with a goal in mind to provide information to the Ridge hockey team by September for the upcoming year's collections. Other business that was discussed, we had asked Mr. Rollo to look into how the district can mitigate the impact of inflation that inflation has on our reserves. How can the district reduce banking fees going forward? And then as an update to that, Mr. Rollo noted that in reviewing the minutes, he would share more about GoodPA versus GoodPA versus FDIC as it relates to banking and district funds. And that is it. As for the items on the agenda tonight, number 1, 2, 3, and 5 are standard items, are recurring standard items. Number 4 is to approve developmental expenses. Number 6 relates to bids for the rooftop units, which came in highly over classroom units, sorry, thank you. That came in highly over our budgeted amount. Number 7 moves some money from the Capital Reserve Fund to help with the surveying for the improvements of Varsity Field. We amended the ARP grant to utilize funds for this year for number 8. Number 9 is to ratify the memorandum of understanding with the Municipal Alliance. Number 10, 11, 12, 13 are all items related to students. Number 14 relates to a new letter of agreement for the sailing team for the following year. Number 15 is to participate in the Alliance for Competitive Energy Services co-op. And I believe that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Discussion? Ms. White?
Were you asking about the personnel audit?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to discuss that at board forum. There's no voting item on it.
So you want us to wait to ask the questions about it till then? Okay.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light,
Yes.
Ms. Hira,
Yes.
Ms. McCune,
Yes.
Mr. Molinari,
Yes.
Mr. Amin,
Yes.
Ms. Chipak,
Yes.
and Mr. Rashio.
Yes.
That brings us up to personnel. There are 14 items. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Salmon, a second. Ms. Light. All right, Personnel Committee report.
Sure. So the Personnel Committee met on March 17th. We reviewed the information about CBAP student members and staff numbers. It looked at current staffing and student enrollment in the CBAP program, as well as projections for enrollment and staff needs for the upcoming year. We talked about the Director of Athletics interview committee and process, discussed a targeting start date of sometime in June so that there's some transition with the current AD. Sean will be implementing an interview and a board approval schedule to meet that timeline. We approved stipends for 2 PE coordinators, totaling about $9,700. It's prorated for this year. It's a coordinator for the 6th to 8th staff and one for the 9th through 12th grade staff. We talked about the open position for a possible HVAC technician. We discussed evaluating an HVAC installer to provide all ongoing HVAC services for new HVACs installed plus all existing HVACs. Advantages could include one source for a service provider, accountability and expertise, rather than relying on Aramark staff that may not have the same level of expertise. Also, it would address the issue of finding staff. The school and Aramark have not been able to find a qualified person for the last 15 months since about January of 2022. We talked about the current vacant positions. Most of the time was spent discussing the open AP position at WAMS. The group agreed for a comprehensive evaluation of the admin structure going forward. There was disagreement, however, if the position should be filled in the meantime. One thought was that the finance presentation at the 313 meeting meant that it was approved. Another thought was that since there was no vote by the board and only a presentation by the staff and some discussion afterwards, it was still undecided. Clarifying that point would be done at the 320 board meeting. That was last week's meeting. We approved stipends for 5 World Language Club Honor Society amounts, prorated for, these will be posted in the spring for the next upcoming year. The next meeting will include an agenda item to review criteria for club stipends going forward. And the next personnel committee will be on an off-cycle date just to coincide with the meeting in June. I'm sorry, not the next one, but the personnel meeting scheduled in June will be a little off-cycle to coincide with the board meeting.
Thank you. Any questions and or discussion? Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Salmon,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Light,
Yes.
Ms. Hira,
Yes.
Ms. McCune,
Yes.
Mr. Molinari,
Yes.
Mr. Amin,
Yes.
Ms. Chipak,
Yes.
and Mr. Rashio.
Yes.
Okay, that brings us up to policy. There are 2 items. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Kuhn, Mr. Salmon, Policy Committee report.
Well, the Policy Committee did not meet since the last report that I gave at the previous meeting. However, well, first of all, the ones that are on for second reading here have not changed since last time when they were on for first reading. So if anyone has any questions about them, obviously they can ask, but nothing has changed on those. And the first reading, we do need to have a little bit of discussion because since we talked about the drafts of these that Mr. Markarian had marked up the policies for first reading, there's been some discussion, at least specifically for the regulation on board committees that I think we need to discuss. So the policy is not any different for board committees than what we discussed, and the language is the same. It's just adding the new committee and describing how the attendance remotely would be taken, by committee by committee. So I don't think we really need to discuss that one. The one on the regulation for board committees, I think now the board is interested in talking about doing something different with the reporting out, I guess, than what we talked about when we drafted this regulations. We had made a timetable for how the minutes will get reported out to the public, how they will get, like how fast it'll happen. We were trying to make sure that we're not having a huge lag between, you know, the meetings and the reporting out. So that was the intent. So I don't know if we want to have a discussion about that. Keith, do you want to?
Does anybody have any questions or something want to add to that? Mr. Amin?
So not specific with what Robin was mentioning, but just more of a technicality with the Facilities and Operations Committee description. It's saying I'll paraphrase a little bit just for time, it's focused on physical plan and property of the district. Sure, that's a facilities part. And then it's saying the committee shall be responsible for identifying and planning for the needs of the school district beyond the term of the serving board. That's not what the Operations Committee is doing, or nor was it intended. We're focused on current needs of the school also, which includes bathrooms, cafeterias, buses, a lot of other things.
So part of that, I guess, would be the long-range facilities plan, which is something that looks out. So I think the last audit we did was in 2011, where we had like an engineering firm or architect come in and look at the entire district to develop the long-range facility plan, which details kind of all the projects that could be done in the district, which dictates the amount of capital reserve that you can keep on hand. Right. So I think that's that.
No, I get that part of it, long term. I'm saying we're also focused on current needs, bathrooms.
Oh, yeah.
cafeteria.
That's not exclusive. I think it just means, right.
But it doesn't say it. So I just wanted to, maybe we should clarify that it's not just long-term needs, it's current needs, like all the work orders that are out there, like the pricing in the cafeteria, like the bathrooms, like the busing reliability. So I just want to clarify that it's not just long-term needs, it's the current needs of the school to bring it to, so that it's well-run.
Okay, so if we want to edit that one a little bit, we should probably not do first reading on that one either. And then we can send it back and Nick can mark it up some more. So in terms of the regulation for board committees, the timeline, I'm trying to find it. Why am I confused here? This is the regulation. Okay, the timeline we had discussed that he drafted based on the discussion at the previous policy meeting was as a guideline, committee minute meetings should be distributed to the full board by the 7th business day following the committee meeting. And then in order to be reported out at a public board meeting, the minutes must be distributed to the full board by the Wednesday prior. And then there was also a part in there, which for some reason I don't see highlighted, was, where was it? Oh, sharing the board committee, the committee should share minutes with the members who attended the meeting for verification that they reflect the meeting. Maybe that was in there already, Nick? I'm starting to lose track. Do you know if that part was already in there or if that was changed? I guess it wasn't because it's not in red.
Yeah, it's in number 7.
So the timeline is really what we're talking about. And then if people are interested in these minutes being published, or are we talking about that? Or?
Well, I think that would be a separate discussion to have in the next policy committee meeting. That we're going to go down that road. I mean, this is for how we report on the minutes that we develop currently. The next discussion, I think, would be how we publish or not what minutes going forward.
But wouldn't we want to write that into the regulation also?
Yeah, I thought we were going to discuss the publishing of board minutes this evening.
That was part of, that is going to be part of board forum, yes.
It is part of board, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, at board forum? Okay, so we're not going to vote on first reading on either of the committee ones then, because we obviously still have to work on them.
So should we just vote on item 2 then, all the second?
So there was the social media and email policy, which we went over last time. So should we vote on that or just table the entire item 1 for now?
With that one, the policy number 169, we discussed it last time that the wording should be super majority, and it still reads as majority.
Okay, so I guess we're sending all 3 of them back to the policy committee? Okay, so then just
yes, thank
no
you.
voting on item 1.
But does that mean that we're not discussing the policies, or are we just waiting again till forum? That's what I'm a little confused on.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing, we've got some revisions that are likely for the policy and regulation on committees. So you probably want to not vote on those until the policy committee meets again. Same thing with the supermajority in policy 0169. So it sounds like you'd prefer to just not vote on one yet. And then the last one, and number 1, is at the top of the next page of the agenda on the textbook adoption, which was revised to update the current practice. So I don't know if you guys are okay with that one. We could leave that one on and take the others off.
Sure, we could move to table the first 3 items under number 1, right?
Yeah, in fact, if everyone agrees, you don't even have to, unless there's any objection, you could just amend the motion to table those 3. Is there if no one disagrees, you can do it by acclamation.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay. So now we're just going to vote on policy P2510 and all the policies under item number 2.
Makes sense.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Chipak?
Yes.
And Mr. Rashio?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us up to curriculum. There is one item. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Salmon, Ms. Light, Curriculum Committee.
Next meeting is April 6th. And the 2 items are the accounting textbook and the AP European History textbook.
Yes, both items are under item number 1. So, any questions or discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Chipak?
Yes.
And Mr. Rashio?
Yes.
Anything from facilities and operations?
Nope, next meeting is coming up.
Okay. Anything from liaison committee reports? Oh, did I skip wellness? I'm sorry. It was on the last one on the page. I apologize. Wellness committee.
Wellness, we just met, so I'll report out the next meeting.
Okay. Liaison, no, thank you. Okay, seeing none, that's
Wait,
going.
can I ask a question for
Yes, please.
liaison?
Yes.
So for the Municipal Alliance, I know that they just met last month, and I know that coming up that there's the Summit Day. Do you have any information that you could share about that?
No, I just filed the paperwork with the township. I'm going to attend the April 4th meeting. Thank you.
Okay. That's going to bring us to public comment on non-agenda items. Please come up, state your name, sign in, and keep it to 3 minutes or less with whatever's on your mind.
Debbie Marcus, 16 Lafayette Lane. Just some notes. Kudos to the whole board for getting so much done in just these short 90 days or so since the new formation. The approach that was taken to the softball field was very efficient and creative. Separately, the concept of revisiting adding an additional access driveway for the ridge parking egress was quite timely. I know it had been considered a long time ago, and I'm glad that the conditions seem ripe to go ahead with it now. Also, thank you for the progress that's been mentioned on the food costs and the bathroom issues. I know it's kind of a done deal at this point, but it's still very much appreciated. And, but in particular, I want to reiterate that I'm happy to hear that the security is being upgraded for elementary kids in those schools in particular. It will supplement their units on communities that they always learn about how those roles of different workers in our communities can play a positive part, and that they can be a helpful and necessary component of society. I've also learned that SROs are trained to help de-escalate social issues that might help with the HIB aspects that are not the tardies and other things that were mentioned before. But finally, I just want to thank you for working together to eventually get to a preliminary budget that does not have a tax increase nor cut services. Thank you.
Alicia Martini, 118 Blackburn Road. There's a saying that the definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I'm here tonight, being crazy, speaking again in support of hiring all 11 assistant principals, and I'm hoping for a different result. The board has heard from parents, teachers, and the administrations all describing the importance of the APs to the schools, but the board does not appear to be listening. So in trying to figure out what I could say tonight to get you to listen, I thought maybe instead of hearing from me, you actually might need to hear from yourselves. So I went on some campaign Facebook pages and I did a little research and found a few things that I thought were meaningful. One of the first things that I read was all parents will have a voice and be heard, and even calling the prior board tone deaf. Unfortunately, from what a lot of us have seen since January, it looks as if the new board are tone deaf as well. Maybe what you meant to say was all parents who agree with everything that you say and do will be heard. Another thing I found was many things to cut outside of cutting programs and services. Reducing the budget doesn't mean cutting positions. But yet the first chance you get at the budget, you are cutting at least one position that directly provides programs and services to our students and teachers. We will work collaboratively with other BOE members, parents, teachers, and the school administration. At the last meeting, Mr. Salmon described your actions as an ambush, and when Ms. White said the board should support Mr. Markarian, someone stated, we're not here to support Mr. Markarian, we're here to oversee him. So again, it does not sound like much collaboration is happening anywhere. Last, I want to point out a few items from the New Jersey School Board Association Code of Ethics for school board members. I believe each of you signed this Code of Ethics and receives ethics training every year, so they should be familiar to you. These are things that you swore to do when making decisions for our schools. I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of the children. It doesn't say I will make decisions based on what is best for a taxpayer, but what is best for the education of our students. I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but to see that they are well run. You break this code every time you ignore the recommendations of our experienced administration and teachers. I will refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups, or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends. There's a lot of groupthink happening up here. People who say they personally are not in favor of certain things still are voting for motions and decisions that align with their cohort rather than standing up for what they believe. So I think some of you, maybe before the next board meeting, need to take a moment and think about what you're doing and what you promised you would do during your campaign and when you signed that code of ethics. Because to many of us, including some of us who voted for you, the answer is clearly no, you are not doing what you promised or what you swore to. Thank you.
Anybody else for public comment?
Joan Bannon. I sincerely have no doubt that we all want the best for our children and to preserve the excellent education and maintain the property values this district has long afforded our community. That said, we have different opinions about how to achieve those goals. And because none of us are all-knowing, the sharing of opinions, even if contrary to another point of view, can be beneficial. Not only is it beneficial for people with opposing views to come and voice those views during public comment at public meetings addressing matters of public concerns, but those views are protected by the United States Constitution and the New Jersey Constitution, our right to free speech and our right to assembly. I am extremely concerned at what I see as efforts to silence opposing points of views, which is irreconcilable with our constitutional rights. Last October, I wrote a letter to local newspapers wherein I questioned the transparency of the 4 Bernard's Children candidates. I was told the campaign manager contacted the newspapers demanding my letter be removed from publication or not published. My letter was removed, but I was ready with and provided proof of the facts in my letter to the editors, who did republish it. I didn't mention this previously before the board because I thought you should get off to a good start at the beginning of the year. Now I am hearing of efforts to silence members of the PTO. And to be crystal clear, I'm not accusing any member of this board of doing that. I've not heard that any member of the board was involved. But I do expect the board to truly welcome all those who come and comment, even if you don't agree with what they have to say. Thus, I'm asking each board member to tell us that you welcome public comment by parents, PTO members, teachers, administrators, students, and residents. Tell us you will ensure our constitutional rights are protected here, and that you vehemently oppose any efforts to limit public comment or any efforts to retaliate against any other speaker. On another issue, in listening to prior meetings when one board member, I believe it was Mr. Molinari, responded to criticism concerning the issue some members had with a new health mandate to develop a plan to promote dignity and respect for all genders, identities, gender expression, and sexual orientation by saying that we should be promoting dignity and respect for everyone. And to me, that response sounded like a "don't say gay" mandate. I think this also could silence our teachers, staff, and students from engaging in open discussion in the classroom. I'd like to know if any board member is in favor of "don't say gay," "don't say gender identity," "don't say gender expression," or "don't say sexual orientation" mandate. Thank you.
Shanna Pfau, 40 Berkeley Circle. I'm also going to repeat myself like I have been the last few meetings here talking about the budget. Again, I hope we're heard or just reiterate the points, but I'm going to bring up some different points tonight regarding APs and the budget in general. So I'm sure you're all aware, but if not, maybe you could explain or look into the difference between in-building administration versus administration in general. So we're talking about administrators in a school building versus administration and cost. You know, they are slightly different, and while I'm also in favor of making sure we're being vigilant and looking at costs, you've heard a lot about how the in-building administration, how that is working in our schools. It is beneficial. You've heard it from parents, you've heard it from teachers. I don't have to reiterate, yada, yada. I have 3 minutes. But you heard it all before, but again, there's a difference between those two positions. Again, we talk about enrollment going down. We keep hearing over the last 20 years, enrollment's going down, yet a couple of meetings ago, I forget which one, we saw a slide saying it went up 1.6%. We have also heard that we haven't done our census information yet, and also being, you know, guys are business people, I'm as well, I manage budgets and large teams, and it's important in risk management to have all the information in hand to make the best decision possible. Not having that current census data and knowing that, I don't know, just looking around, people have made comments. A lot of people have been moving into the neighborhoods, especially during COVID times. We'd hope that we'd get that information first before making anything. And then 20 years ago, the school district and the climate and the schools is very different than 20 years now that our children are going through. I don't think you could say, hey, 20 years ago it worked, so it's gonna apply today. We have a different thing going on, especially no one wants to hear it, but the after effects of COVID, et cetera, et cetera. But so hearing 20 years ago it worked, let's do it 20 years now. I don't think anybody would apply business matters that way. Let's not do it for our children's education, please. And then I'm gonna piggyback, I didn't know someone else was gonna speak about the behavior in our community. I mean, we've seen it over the last few meetings here amongst the board members, and now we're seeing it spilling into our community. We could disagree, but the retaliation for PTO members, emails we're getting, harassments because we're reiterating information as volunteers at meetings we hear that are not rumors, it's really unacceptable. And it speaks to everything the woman beforehand spoke about here. So you're setting the tone for our community, setting the tone for our children. Please set a better tone.
Hi, Jennifer Hamilton, 53 Conkling Street. I just wanted to say I was also similarly shocked at last week's meeting for several reasons. First of all, just tuning in from home, listening to this, and having my son kind of pop in while I'm listening to this call and having to kind of mute it and turn it off because it no longer seemed like appropriate kind of background noise. I was also shocked because after I had to turn it off, I found that there was the last minute vote. So I feel like we have expressed, a lot of people have expressed for a long time our thoughts on having the assistant principal positions in our schools, how important that is. And while I think we all want to spend dollars wisely, I think the reason we're all here is because of our children. My children attend these schools, people's, children have attended these schools. I want my children to be surrounded by teachers that are adequately compensated and supported. I want them supported by administration that is similarly, satisfied in their roles. And I feel like we have a great system with our assistant principals in place and with the idea of backfilling the position that was there. We had a parent speak at a prior meeting about the concern. She had a 7th grader. That position, there's a huge hole there for a lot of kids. We need that support in our schools. I want my children supported. I want all of the children in this district to be adequately supported by our teachers and our administration. Thank you.
Hi, Kelly Target, Annan Road. I know you all were grateful and probably happy I didn't show up last week, but it wasn't a lack of interest on my part. Everybody was really sick at my house. So I'm looking forward to the day when I don't have to attend a board meeting. Trust me, I don't want to be here every week over week. But I do want to say that I also did not watch last week's meeting unfold. I heard about it, and I want to make sure you're all aware that this was the thing people were talking about, is how poorly behaved so many of you were. I would be ashamed if I were your parent, frankly, to hear about that sort of report out in public from our community talking about that. I think it's a shame, and it's really, truly very sad. I think that it's clear that there's a lack of collegiality here, and I know firsthand that when that happens, communications break down. You form alliances instead of building consensus. You may omit people from email chains in order to try and play a game of gotcha at the moment that a vote is called. I've personally heard a board member, who I won't name, but I'm looking over there, talk about not supporting cutting the APs, but then when a vote is called, that position changes immediately. I just ask you all to look and reflect internally on why you are here, and I hope you're here for the right reasons. Your view matters, believe it or not. Your independent assessment matters, and to just walk in lockstep as soon as somebody calls a vote, seeming to take some sort of a cue that that's what you're supposed to do in order to move with the groupthink is not why you're here. The late budget is a symptom of your lack of collegiality, and the moment to look at cuts is not after you've proposed a budget, which frankly, I have no confidence in at this point, right? You published something, or you've agreed to publish something that you then undermined all believability in right afterwards. I wonder about the ethics of that. Frankly, you basically issued your own no confidence vote on the budget that you prepared. And I don't think that's fair to the people of this township who look to you for leadership, guidance, and frankly, transparency, which was a big keyword that a lot of us heard recently. I also want to say that it's really sad to me that we're only considering Mr. Salmon's idea of changing start times at this point. Where were you in January, February, March? It was like you were all waiting for Mr. Markarian to cut his own budget without giving him any guidance other than 0% tax increases. That's not a guidance. You all should have educated yourselves earlier on that. And I hope you'll take that role seriously in the future and moving forward. And I know other people have commented already. There was an extensive discussion of the HIB violations happening within the community earlier tonight. I came a little bit late, but I walked in on that. What I didn't hear, though, is about the HIB violations happening on this board for all of us to see. I think it's really shocking to me that the bullying, the harassment, the insults, the name-calling that is happening is so disappointing to me. It's not something I'd want my kids to see. But more importantly, I hope you all know that you are funneling this behavior out into our community. Months ago, I shared that I received a threatening letter from a fake person. Somebody actually invented a person to send me a threatening letter to my home because I spoke up at the board meeting about what has now proven to be true. One of our other PTOs received a threatening email from what appears to be a fake person. I believe you were all copied on that, so you know about that one firsthand. We have our PTOs being threatened. People are asking for our bylaws, for our budgets, for our financial statements. And these are not people who have any interest in our schools whatsoever. Understood. These are not people who are members of our communities or even who have children in the district, but they're doing this as a method of intimidation to silence us all. If you don't speak up against that now, then I have to say it looks like you're all a party to it. And I hope to hear during board forum that you condemn this behavior and that you won't allow it to continue in your name. Thank you.
Hi, Victoria Costa, 15 Hilltop Road. I just want to make something clear. I've been asking for the bylaws. PTO is a 501c3. It is a tax law to provide bylaws. I have seen PTO bullying on a level that is unreal. So don't let them piss on you and tell you it's raining. They do nothing but out people on Facebook as to who are members, who pays dues, who volunteers, on both sides of the aisle. It is not just the Republicans or the conservatives or the independents. It is also their own. That's number one. Okay, so their lying is out of control. And I don't care about being in the lion's den, but when you start bullying and then come here and tell you guys that you're bullying, they should look at their Facebooks of what they say about people constantly. I'm tired, as an underrepresented minority in this community, to constantly hear from women as to who and what we should do for Black women, for Latina women, for Chinese women. The communities in this town are scared to come forward. I have walked through and spoke to 200+ people in the hills who are so afraid to voice their opinion. Those 501Cs I asked for certain reasons, because I wanted to know what was the practice for outing people on Facebook. What is the practice when PTO members get up here and lie about mold situation? So the lies are out of control. And it's not just from former board members who lie about calling parents when their kids are sexually assaulted. I didn't see this many PTO women come up and care about the cheerleading situation, the softball situation, the fencing situation, or any sports. It's a shame that they didn't have this much moxie. Thank you.
Good evening. Neha Gorfinkel, Apple Tree Lane. I'm here tonight to express my support for filling all the assistant principal positions included in the preliminary budget approved last week. I have 3 children enrolled in our school system, ranging from pre-K to middle school. As a parent with many more years to come in this district, I request that no disruptions be made to the administrative structure, absent evidence that such a change would be in the students' best interests. From a parental perspective, given everything these children have endured in the past few years and the societal climate that they live in now, oversight positions in our schools is more crucial than ever. It appeared from last week's meeting and the last-minute motion that the decision-making around this issue is financially driven. And while fiscal responsibility is essential for obvious reasons, our children's welfare comes first. The youth in this district deserve decision-making that is centered on them and incorporative of the residents' positions and guidance from our educators and administrators. With that in mind, I ask, did anyone with an education or administrative background recommend a change on our district's administrative structure? Because I believe you have heard recommendations from the administration and staff in favor of filling the vacant position. And why is personnel alone the area being revisited for potential cuts to achieve a budgetary goal? That approach seems tunneled rather than expansive. My second point is a request for the board to adopt a notice policy on motions. The motion made last week to revisit the personnel budget and the AP position concerned me. As an observer, what it looked like was that some board members knew the motion was coming and the rest were blindsided. Then the back and forth that ensued after the motion was made was nothing short of disturbing. There were comments made by experienced board members indicating that the procedure was not typical of how the board operates. It definitely appeared atypical. Yet no policy was cited to stop it. So I'm asking you all to implement a notice policy to limit a similar situation in the future. I appreciate the comments made by the board president today addressing the irregularity of the last meeting. Last week's meeting left me as a parent quite alarmed about the functioning of this board and concerned that such motions could be made on any issue last minute. I'm sure that kind of concern is not the desired outcome of any of you seek. So please incorporate measures to keep that from happening again. Thank you for your time.
Stella Perna, 105 Tuxford Terrace. They say trust is built on consistency. I'm going to give you a little background on the consistency that I've witnessed. When my twins entered kindergarten, I volunteered for the boring air conditioning committee at Liberty Corner. And that was only because I didn't want to work on the casino committee, because I don't go to casinos. I wanted to understand and finally address that issue. We were offered free air conditioning units from Carrier who happened to be in Liberty Corner. And we said, no, thank you. Free. We said no to free. Okay, great. But we did raise enough money during the casino event, and we were allotted so much money to address bringing in units. Of course, we were told, oh, those units are not really nice looking. And I said, well, you know, the building that you added on to the 100-year-old structure is also not nice looking, but here we are. In the end, when we got a bid from Aramark, it would cost $13,000 to purchase air conditioning units for those classrooms that had the worst temperatures. And we had the students taking temperatures. It was an all-in event for the kids. 3 days later, $13,000 bid became a $39,000 bid. And I thought, well, that's weird, 3 times higher. At the time, I mentioned it to the principal, and she says, I don't know, I think that's just what the cost is. I went back to the Aramark liaison, and I said, I think there's some funny business going on here. And he said, well, that's what the cost is. I wasn't happy, but what could I do? I mean, that's what it cost. Interestingly, the following year, kicking and screaming, I became PTO president when my girls were in 1st grade. I learned a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity, for better or for worse, because I understood now I had to learn about the budget. And I understood that every school got a $13,000 technology budget. Okay, that's great. Except the following year, 2 of the kindergarten classrooms were converted back to gen ed education, and the principal asked for 10 grand to outfit them with smart boards. Principal asked myself and my co-president, we need $10,000. This is literally the 2nd day of school. And I thought, we already spent $13,000? Went to the superintendent at the time and said, hey, we spent the 13 grand. And she says, oh no, we already ordered the smart boards, they're arriving tomorrow. Had I not stopped and asked, I would have handed over 10 grand of family-funded monies from an event for no reason. One last example. Okay, really quick. My husband's in the solar business. He offered free services to assess the roofs so we could do solar panels Again, we said no. $125,000 worth of assessment, and we said no. So to me, I don't trust. I don't trust that we're handling our money wisely. So thank you to the board for taking the effort to go through line by line and looking at the details, because that's what responsible adults do. I also want to stress, thank you for focusing on safety, near and dear to my heart, but let's focus on academics. Let's get back to that and help our kids get to college with the understanding of what they need to be well prepared. Thank you.
Janice Corrado, 8 Lone Oak Road. I'd like to thank Mr. Molinari for his board president comments. Our community deserves a board that is respectful to all, and I'm glad to hear you acknowledge the work of Jean O'Connell and Allison Reed of our Special Services Department. They truly have our students' best interests at heart, and I'm glad to hear that you're willing to work with them. As a parent of a special education child in the district, I would like to emphasize to the board that in the area of special education, there really is no way to separate staff from programs and services. Programs and services for special education, and in fact for all education, are inextricably tied to the staff who deliver them. In public schools, special education programs and services must be provided by certified teachers and licensed therapists by law. Concern has arisen among special education families who have witnessed the way this board has handled the decision of whether or not to hire an assistant principal for WAMS in the March 20th meeting. Rash decisions without thoughtful research and analysis achieve nothing to benefit the students of our district. Despite assurances from various board members that there will be no cuts to special education programs or services, we would like assurances that this will include staff. The community has little trust that this board understands how special education works. Qualified educators are not like programmers who can be hired quickly through a .com website. The educators and supervisors in our special education department have decades of advanced training and specialized experience and should not be considered expendable. The community is watching, and we want to have faith in this board. Just because you can do something by virtue of 5 lockstep votes doesn't mean that you should. The first year of your service might have been the year you listened, learned, and received training in order to properly serve the students and families of this community. I hope that our new board members are open to learning. Thank you.
Aaron Weber, 15 Hilltop. For those of you that have the handout tonight, if you take a look at item 6, it talks about the HVAC system. So whereas the bids were received on March 16th, 2023, the HVAC upgrades project at Ridge High School, whereas the two bids, the lowest bid was submitted by Environmental Climate Control in the amount of almost $1 million. And I don't know what the architect budgeted was, but it exceeds that. So we're throwing out both of these bids. I do this stuff for a living, so let me explain what has to happen. So you have to get bids approved. You have to either change the budget and increase it, or you have to change the scope of work, which means not as many units are going to be swapped out as what we thought. All of that has to take, we're in the first week of spring. You have to line up contractors, order materials, order the actual units, which may be back ordered. I don't know that they're going to get done in time. And then line up the work, because this has to get done over the summer. If all that doesn't take place soon, contractor's not going to be able to get done over the summer, and we're kicking this can down the road another year, because by the time we do get approved bids, it's too late. Summer's over. Well, so what that means is, once again, we're going to go through another year where the faculty and the kids are in a building with struggling HVAC units. So when we're talking about problems with the budgets and trying to find money for stuff, this is exactly what we're talking about. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jim Bologna. I live on Woodstone Road. How's everybody? I want to thank the board for showing up here every other week. You guys do a great job. The administration, our newer business administrator, congratulations. And I'd like to do a bit of an introduction of myself. So some of you know me, some of you know my wife. So I'm a father of a Ridge student. I'm the husband of a Ridge teacher. I'm also the father of an alumni of this school system that is a director at the Trevor Project. You can go into detail if you want about the Trevor Project. Look it up, Freddie Bologna. And I'm also, by virtue of my gray hair, receiving discounts, senior discounts. So I acknowledge a cross-section that's pulling the board all these different directions. And I think the new board is doing a fantastic job doing this, what they said they were going to do. Number one, they're looking at the finances. And I got to tell you, I look at P&Ls all the time, and I'm so confused. How did you arrive at this budget? You budgeted against a budget? I don't get it. Can't we see an actual and then budget from the actual? I don't get that. I also want to congratulate you in looking at the health curriculum. I look at Netflix, as many as you do, and see at the title, they tell you what's in it. Sexuality, nudity, alcohol. These are warnings. I think some of our curriculum should have warnings. Some of the books that I'm hearing about, they have inappropriate things in these books. And I congratulate you, Mr. Molinari, for looking at this stuff and putting warnings on this. If we're going to put warnings on our Netflix, why aren't we investigating the books that are already in our curriculum? And the excuse that I'm hearing is the board approved it. They never read it. They never looked at it. So maybe we ought to backtrack a little bit. Now, last week when I was here, 2 weeks ago when I was here, there was a big discussion about the police officers. People came up and they were discussing how students were going to be upset about seeing people with guns, policemen with guns. Today, you hear what? Another slaughter. It's unbelievable. I'm going to wrap it up, and I appreciate the time, believe me. And I think, Nick, when you addressed that this has been a recommendation, good for you. Because as soon as we have a tragedy, you're going to say, why didn't we protect our kids? The high school is protected. Why not all these other schools? Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Cody Smith, 36 Royal Oak Drive. A few comments in no particular order. First, I'd like to congratulate you on the budget. The zero increase, I think, is the way to go. I didn't like how you had the $300,000 for police protection drawn out as the only increase, and I think in $110 million or so odd budget, the fact that we get to zero and we don't call that aspect out as being the only increase is a good thing. Regarding the comments about the whole process, I would start with the administration. The budget got to the board way too late. Understand there was a new board that was put in place, and as others have said, the board has only been here 3 months. But with the new board that came in, and fortunately wanted to look at each line item and understand what was in the budget, and then stonewalling might be too strong a word, but they didn't get the budget until late. So I think the process, what happened last week began with the late budget and even the need to call that meeting. So I don't want to let that go undiscussed. And then with regard to the AP, I don't personally care whether it's 10 or 11 APs. I think the point here is that people should remember it was the last board and this administration that didn't backfill that position. And so, and there wasn't a lot of discussion about that at the time, as my recollection is. So I appreciate certain people saying that was a mistake and we should have done that, but there wasn't anything done really at the time to see whether that was the right alternative or not. And so it shouldn't be hung on this board. But I do think with respect to the process, I would have liked to have seen the board approve a budget with only 10 APs with the directive to go back to Mr. Markarian and see if he could find room in the budget to then have the 11th AP. I think the procedure, and that caused a lot of confusion and people to get reactionary and a little bit emotional, was the process that the original budget had 11 and then go back and ask to see whether or not we can fund that. I think it should have been flipped around and approved 10 and then said, we'll leave the door open to put the 11th in there in the final budget. And with respect to the whole discussion about whether or not directing Mr. Markarian to go back and look at it, I support the board saying look at it now. The whole notion of kicking the can down the road to 23, 24 and then looking at it, we should not do that. We need to look at it now. With regard to the sex curriculum, that's essentially what we did. We came in, we talked about making changes, and the next thing you know, we're going to do another survey this summer. We did a survey when this all came out. To me, that was just a form of kicking the can down the road and stalling, and then when we get there, we'll figure out another reason why we can't do anything or make any changes. So I think you made the right decision. Look at it now. Don't kick the can down the road. And then with respect to the whole thing, the process does need to get better. I think we've all said that and seen that. It opens the door to people to write long dissertations, the letters to the editor in the Burnersville News with a bunch of half-truths and non-truths. And so we do need to fix the process. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? Ms. Fox, are you online?
Hi, Barbara Geary, 66 Dryden Road. I watched the last board meeting from Monday night, excuse me, and one board member took ownership of making a bad decision in September. While I can appreciate that, I wonder how vital it actually is. Where was the heartfelt sadness for not being being in the best interest of our students in September? We sat there and we were screamed at when we talked about HIBs. Meanwhile, you're screaming on a stage at other people. How is that appropriate? When the decision was made in September, are you telling me that the decision was solely made on the decline of enrollment of 10% over 5 years? HIBs were up 300% in November. The same time that this decision was made, the board sat through the Trends of Mental Health presentation that showed how important an AP role plays in 7th grade in connection with the counselors in William Annan using the looping model. I know Ms. Hudak spoke to Mr. Markarian in depth in the need to have this assistant principal role, but it was cut in September. I fully support having 11 APs in our district. Stop fighting for this role when the prior board is the ones that made the decision. Whether you take the ownership of the mistake now and say you didn't know is disingenuous to the community. How can you say you didn't know what was going to happen when you had the facts in front of you? You had a principal making her pitch of why it was vital. You sat there and saw that you see the HIBs every week, every month of what is going on in the schools, and then you see the trends in mental health, and you made the cut anyway. And now you're trying to throw a mirror in the current board, the new board's face, saying, well, you're not doing it for the right reasons. It's unfair to the community, it's unfair to anyone else. What's even more unfair is the lack of ability for you all to try to figure out a way to work together. This is not fair to the community, it's not fair to the students, it's not fair to the administration. We would all appreciate it if you'd find a way to work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for one more public comment. I believe one further person came forward, and that'll wrap up our 45 minutes of public comment.
Hi, Neslahan Montag, 41 Essex Place. My husband and I, our kids have been residents of the town for over 25 years. All 4 of our boys have attended district schools. I've been to a lot of Board of Ed meetings, but nothing was like last week, and I think people agree that it was kind of set a whole new low in dysfunction. We welcome new members with fresh perspectives, but judging by last week, it's a great idea to include a new item on the board agenda for board governance. I know there was a whole issue about kind of the bait and switch that people felt took place with the motion after the vote. And I know that Mr. Molinari mentioned something about it was emergency circumstances because you were required to vote on the preliminary budget last week, which may be the case, but you weren't required to make a motion to then kind of undo essentially what you had voted to approve. And then immediately after the vote was done, we hear the motion, and then public comment is cut. We know you only have to have one public comment, but you cut it so that no one could say anything about what the board did after essentially reversing the vote. And then you wonder why your actions are called out as being disingenuous. You know, our community deserves better. We don't tolerate that. You're required to have full board participation in the budgeting process, to listen to public input, to listen to educated, experienced opinions. And people are just concerned that you're not doing that. They're concerned with your lack of transparency, your failure to keep them properly informed, your apparent inability to function properly as a board because you're failing to follow basic protocol. You're rushing to push through decisions without adequate information or considering expert advice. You, as new board members, asked the superintendent to make a budget with a 0% tax increase, and he did that. He did that with 0 increase. He also included money for security and all 11 APs. And despite that, you're still hamstringing him, and you won't let him fill that AP position. Now you're rushing him to find more ways to cut administrative costs, and there's no good reason why. The Finance Committee report that people were questioning wasn't because of confusion about not having access to minutes. It was because the summary that was given by the Finance Chair omitted critical information that took place during the Finance Committee meetings. It left out important facts and didn't mention that some of the members at those committee meetings had significant concerns that they'd expressed about not taking into account long-term costs, declining revenues, revenue streams that are not necessarily going to be present in a couple of years. These concerns were all literally written at the top of the written minutes that weren't public, but the chair didn't think it was important enough to include that when reporting it to the public. And that's what people were upset about, besides failing to follow. Okay, wow, there's 3 hours I could talk about the failures from last week, but inadequate planning for long-term effects, failing to follow all the input that you've gotten from administrators, principals, staff, families about the importance of the APs. That can't be overstated. And not relying on accurate information regarding demographics. Your own district website has conflicting information saying it's declining, and then in the user-friendly budget it says it's increasing. So you have to get your facts straight. And you're doing a big disservice to our community by forcing the administration to try to make these cuts and rush through to it without adequate consideration of all the information that should go into it. And, okay, thank you. Also, please produce the documents that I requested. I understand that they're in written format, so I'd appreciate them in writing. Thank you.
And that will close public comment. For the record, the board does welcome everybody to come up and express their opinion, no matter what it may be. Mr. Markarian, is there anything you'd like to address?
There was a comment about the HVAC bids being rejected. We anticipate going back out to bid in the fall on that item. Other than that, I think I'd be reiterating the same message we heard a lot. So thanks to everybody for their comments, and I appreciate everybody setting a really positive tone. Thank you for that.
Okay, that's going to bring us to board forum. We have 3 items under board forum. Should probably go in order, starting off with school start times. Would somebody like to kick that off, Ms. White?
Yeah, I'm very much in favor for talking about it, but I just want to make it clear that everybody understands that this is not something that we're talking about for September, because it is a process that we'd have to go through. So I didn't want anybody to walk away tonight and think, oh, this is happening in September. We did start talking about this pre-COVID, and there are a lot of positives from starting the school time to switching it. I would definitely be in support of looking into this, and to also, you know, believe it or not, we have all different sets of kids in school now than when we first talked about it. So families that may have felt differently because they had elementary kids might now be in middle school, middle schoolers might be in high school. So I do think it would really benefit from a BT Connect and bringing back all the stakeholders to talk about this.
Ms. Light.
I actually agree with that. I think it has a lot of benefits, not only to, you know, student wellness. You know, I think that that's been a big concern, you know, throughout the state, actually, over the number of years. But it also does give us the benefit of possibly negotiating better busing contracts, which is significant from a financial perspective going forward, and can help bend the cost curve as we've been looking at it. So there's numerous things, and to reiterate from the Finance Committee, we acknowledge that there is a lot of logistics that would need to be worked out related to this, and a lot of considerations. So a lot of considerations around extracurricular sport times, a lot of you know, additional things with parental child care, you know, before care, after care, things like that nature. So I think, you know, if we could get this done for the 24-25 school year, and that even might be aggressive, but that would actually be optimal. But we want to make sure we give the parents enough time to be able to plan their lives, and as well as the staff, because it's going to affect the staff schedules as well.
Petra.
Hi, so this morning I had a great morning because I had my late arrival. So, you know, I cruised in here, 7:25, coffee in hand, which is, you know, a great start to any A day. And I think that in general, a lot of students, at least when they're juniors and seniors, are really looking forward to this later arrival on certain days. But we've had interest from underclassmen student government representatives who have reached out to me and reached out to other people in our student government about how they wish they could participate in the late arrival because of, obviously, like the amounts of stress that they tend to be under. You know, student government kids always have a little bit too many worlds on their back. So, but in general, I think that considering pushing the start time is something that those students would be interested in talking about at a BT Connect meeting. I mean, I know I was at the one pre-COVID, and I think that they really would want to share their opinion there. I know we don't always have students at these meetings, but.
Mr. Salmon?
Yeah, so I first want to just clarify that if you think moving school start times is a good idea, then it was my idea, but if you don't, then it was Larry's idea. So No, but this started before COVID. We did have a BT Connect meeting. It was great. There were kids there. There were staff there. And it was a really great discussion because at that time, I think Princeton had just done it. So it was a really interesting, and they were the first in the state to do later start times for high school. So I think as part of kind of what Jen said, like in addition to you know, looking into like the logistics and things like that, we know that there's a few schools, peer schools that have done this, Chatham, Ridgewood, and obviously Princeton. So doing the due diligence there and finding out kind of the unforeseen circumstances and, you know, unintended effects, what happens there, because we know, I think we all kind of agree on the good of it. It's just, you know, what's kind of the fallout of it. The busing, so it will not 100% reduce the cost of busing. The idea with transportation is that it will make us a more attractive client for busing companies because they will be employing one driver to run routes to, like, for example, Oak Street, Whams, and then Ridge. So by doing that, they have to use less drivers so they can bid on other contracts, which will be extremely helpful to us and hopefully will like materialize because our recent past bidding history with bus companies has been not so great. We had, you know, last year we had a company decline to renew their contract, and then we went out to bid, and then one company came back to bid. It was the same company, just at an increased rate. So hopefully, fingers crossed, doing this would just make us a more attractive client and would reduce that busing cost, but it's not necessarily that just by doing this we will reduce busing costs. So I just want to kind of make that clear. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say similar things to what Mr. Salmon just said about the busing. We can't be guaranteed that there's going to be savings. We just won't know, but it's at least a possibility that might be able to help us with our finances. I think I forgot, I went to go on the website and see if the minutes from the BT Connect meeting, you know, are on there, which I'm sure they are, just so people could look at it and get a kind of an idea of some of the different issues. There's traffic issues and all kinds of issues that that we have to consider. But I think it's definitely, we should have a BT Connect meeting and restart the conversation.
Mr. Amin?
So I echo everyone's comments. It seems like there's definitely agreement amongst the majority of the board that we should evaluate this, which is a good thing. The one thing I'll emphasize and the one thing I'll just add without repeating what everyone has said is there are trade-offs. Not everybody's going to be happy. There's logistics, there's activities, there's sports. It may mean pulling students earlier before the end of the school, which is not going to go well. I'm not going to be happy as a parent. Teachers aren't going to be happy. So there are going to be trade-offs. It's not a complete win-win-win everywhere. And then the thing I'll add is I've heard that a few times now that before I was on it, the board has talked about it. I think we should aggressively pursue it rather than having just discussion after discussion. It will not be done for this September, as Jen said, but we definitely should target the following September and figure out the logistics and what the trade-offs are. We have to communicate to the public what the trade-offs are, and we shouldn't just get paralyzed by discussion and discussion. Let's make a decision and move on with it.
I second that, Mr. Amin.
Anybody else? Yeah. So I think move it to a BT Connect this spring. And that would be the next step. Okay. Well, with nothing else on school start times, number 2 is the personnel audit. Would somebody like to speak to that?
Just a question. Should
Yes.
we make a motion to instruct the administration to move forward with this?
Oh, I don't think, I mean, we never
No.
have to do motions for BT Connects. I think it
No?
goes on the radar.
Yep, we'll do it this spring.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Personnel audit?
Okay,
Right.
personnel audit. I know Ms. White had some questions, so I actually want to defer to her questions, then I'll answer them. Maybe we can get into a healthy discussion.
Okay. I have a bunch of them, so I'll just read them all, and then you can take them. So the first thing is it read as if it was definitely something that was going to be happening. So my first question would be, in terms of hiring a personnel consultant, would be, why would we hire an outside consultant to do the task that the superintendent is fully able to do? And he's already said he would be able to do it at no additional cost. Then how would an outside consultant have an idea of the needs of our students and the programs and the services we offer? For instance, the difference of the needs of an ABA program or the BD program or LLD or the vocational skills, or know what we need in terms of in-class support or resource room. And then how would a personnel audit be able to be completed in time to do a deep dive for the coming school year, because we do our RIFs, which means the reduction in force, in the spring. And then what is the cost for the consultant? Because I know, some are not willing to even use what's in our budget to have the 11 APs. So I question, where is the money then coming for a personnel audit consultant? Because personally, I'd rather have that money used for an AP and have Mr. Markarian and Mr. Syed and Ms. Fox be the ones that do the audit because they know the school. So those are my list.
Okay, so I'll address some of those, well, I'll try and address all of them, because I know you deserve an answer on all of that. Well, first of all, I know that Mr. Syed is actually embarking upon a benchmarking exercise with various different school districts, okay? We're looking at a holistic method of looking at the district, okay? And there's opportunities where we can survey personnel and start narrowing down the focus of what that scope of services should look with a consultant. There are consultants in many, many, many different consulting firms that have the expertise, not only in the educational areas and the educational business knowledge that have this experience, that can do that. So by narrowing the scope of service, we can customize the areas we really want them to look at. So in conjunction with Mr. Markarian, Ms. Fox, Mr. Syed, we can really define what that scope is. So we can work together as a board to come up with the methodology. I have some suggestions that we can propose at the next Finance Committee meeting, or probably it's more personnel related and should be at the Personnel Committee meeting. I'm referred back to that. As far as the costs go, like I said, all of these types of audits or projects can be, again, formed with the scope of services. And basically, you want to focus on the areas in which you feel is going to gain the most momentum. What I've seen from audits and projects such as this is that it could go to a very, very expensive, in-depth exercise where you're documenting and writing SOPs for every position, which I don't think is where we want to go. But we do want to do is we want to understand the services that every employee is really bringing to the table, because we want to make sure that not only are teachers performing the right services based on their expertise, and counselors are performing the best services for theirs. But we also want to identify areas, and I believe we saw an email this week from a member of the community. They actually suggested exactly this, is looking. Big companies are literally going around and they are automating processes to reduce the workload on their staff, to increase staff satisfaction, morale, and get rid of some of the, I call it monkey work in my line of business, because it's stuff that just takes a lot of time, doesn't add a ton of value, so that we can actually focus the staff on what their expertise are. So I really think that if we undertake this in conjunction with Mr. Syed, Mr. Markarian, Ms. Fox, right, and we work together as a board to go forward with this, I think we're going to find that not only will it help inform the long-range capital plan, because looking at investments in technology and, even software architecture, I was bringing up an example of just an asset management system, and I did this in the board meeting, or in the committee meeting rather. Just by getting another asset management system could help the business office significantly, because what that asset management system could do is it can track the equipment, it can track the maintenance records, it can track the warranty expiration, it can track work orders, POs, et cetera, so that instead of developing what the replacement value of a building would cost for the property insurance by managing a whole bunch of spreadsheets. They could print a report and it's all there. But it also monitors the maintenance records so that you can determine what assets are the problem. And if that asset is a problem, is that asset still under warranty? So overall, that helps manage the district a lot better as well. So not only can it help save us money in the long run by using data to make intelligent decisions, we can also sit there and look for opportunities to automate various different things to take workload off of all of our staff within the district, which should hopefully improve their wellness, their satisfaction, their stress level, and hopefully improve employee retention among the teachers. So I've seen this done at numerous different organizations in this manner. They're all called different things, but I've seen a lot of success and a lot of just satisfaction improved, morale improved related to it. And it's not about replacing staff, it's about right sizing and making sure everybody's doing the jobs that they should be doing. Hopefully that answers your question.
The biggest concern is also, which I get you can't answer, is the cost, right? That's, I would want more information specifically on that. I know you don't have that at this point.
Yeah, I don't know what the total cost would be, but I think that it's something that I'm recommending personally to the board that we start pursuing looking at this and really start discussing this in earnest. This is not something that's going to be done in the next 2 months. This is something we're looking at for long-term, sustainability for the most part, but also trying to look for some quick hits. So typically what you find with these types of audits is that you have short, medium, and long-term benefits, and you figure out the costs of what each one of those benefits would be to implement so that you can figure out what are you getting in the short term, what are your long term, what is your return on investment on various different things. And if you approach it in that manner, you can prioritize what is going to bring the maximum value, in the shortest period of time and at the least amount of cost. Any other questions?
Ms. McKeon?
Yeah, I did a little bit of Googling and talking to people in different districts and other places. I am questioning, I didn't find any examples or anyone who's done something like this in a K-12 school district. I mean, I don't know if I'm totally understanding what the scope of what we're talking about is. I found a lot of educational consulting firms that do higher education, charter schools, private schools, because they run more in a business model, like how to attract more people to apply to your school, how to figure out how much to charge for tuition, all the businessy aspects. And I've found consultants that go into failing school districts when there's a problem to try to turn them around. So they've worked with big city school districts and stuff like that. So is anyone aware, I'd be interested in Mr. Syatt's information, of talking to people in other public school districts, if anyone's done something like this.
Mr. Syatt?
So typically something like that, when you look at personnel, we've in the past looked at administrative structure, we've looked at staffing, and we actually do that every year when we look at sectioning. We typically, when we schedule, we are looking at our efficiencies with staff, but as far as bringing in an outside consultant to do a personnel audit, I'm not familiar with it. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I haven't heard of colleagues. Obviously, after reading the finance minutes, I reached out to see if there would be consultants that we could look at. Nobody has any experience, but that doesn't mean we can't find folks that would be able to do that. But usually that's done internally, right? Human resource director is doing something like that, and then if the board's not happy with it, then potentially they go out and look at bringing in an outside consultant. But certainly, if it's the will of the board, we'll find some consultants that could come in and do something like that.
And there are various different firms that specialize in human resources, things like this. It may not be, education related, but they do specialize in things just like this. I mean, I know, obviously the firm that I work for probably would not be price effective to be able to do that. But there are other firms, other consulting firms of various different sizes that have human resources groups that can do things like this. And it might not be education specific, but they do have the same skill sets and they know when to bring somebody in from an educational background to help, inform some of their decisions and make sure that they have that kind of education background expertise. So, I don't think we should get hung up on, is it any school districts do it? I think we should decide as a board whether it makes sense from a long-term sustainability. And do we want to bring our schools into the 21st century? Do we want to make it easier on our teachers? Do we want to get the right tools in place to be able to manage our assets appropriately and to manage our staff appropriately and to, take out some of the nonsense work, even to, I know we've been having problems hiring for a position that will help integrate the software because it's hard to get something like that. So looking at our software investments and looking at what might make sense to implement so that it's more, integrated, or getting somebody to integrate it. So it could make a whole lot of decisions that gets all this stuff done right away and doesn't overburden our administration that's already focusing on a bunch of other things.
Ms. Hero.
Can you, just so I understand and maybe the community also understands, when you speak of automation, can you give a specific example in the context of like our district and education, like an example of something?
I'm going to use this example, but I want to make sure that, I'm mentioning that this does not replace people in any way, shape, or form, because I think that's a common misconception. But various things like robotic process automation, that is a level of automation that takes repetitive work, takes the risk out of repetitive work, and does something simple like a teacher can send something to an email and it populates the system and you're done, or it automatically sends various different things out. There's things like intelligent automation that are tools. Some of them are, Microsoft Office 365 license-free type solutions, okay, that help. They're ETL tools that help transform data, with the press of a button, and it doesn't take that much to learn how to do it. So there's various different ways of automation and various different types of automation, and it's really just a matter of identifying the right tools for the processes, and you can't really understand what you need to do and what you need to invest in until you understand, kind of what the daily work life looks at. So, one of the thoughts is doing kind of a very, very in-depth personnel survey so that we could narrow down the areas of opportunity.
I'm sorry, I'm still confused.
Can I just jump in? Because I was confused too during the meeting, but I got more clarity. I think there's kind of, at least in my estimation, there's three things going on here. One is the focus on administrative costs that was kind of like the subject of the motion last week. That has been in process in terms of benchmarking where our administrative cost is relative to other districts, other peer districts, and statewide, I guess, using kind of that data. So that's like one piece of what's going on to look at administrative costs. Where do we fit within the spectrum of the state and within our peer districts? That's one piece of this. The other piece was the personnel audit for personnel, like looking at what each person does, like Kirsten was saying, for what they do for every employee. So, right, this is like a much more comprehensive view that is not exclusive to administration, but special education aides to classroom teachers, to administrators, to supervisors, all the way, across the scope of service that the district provides. Look at each position and figure out, is that employee doing the right thing? Are they qualified to do what they're doing? And then, I guess there was another point, but the other aspect of this personnel audit was the automation aspect. So that's another piece of kind of personnel because you're already talking to everybody in the district. So I guess the wrap-in would be there, hey, staff member X, what are you doing that's manual that we could do something that we can automate? And how can we automate that task for you? So like, that was a question I asked because there was discussion about, or proposal about how this could affect the long-range facilities plan for the district. So that's where you would bring in more automation technology, like some robots or
machine learning.
Yeah, machine learning, natural language processing.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is going to be running the district soon.
No.
Oh, no, sorry. Again, that's a much more comprehensive look at automation that's kind of tied into personnel because you're already talking to everybody. So that's how I understood the personnel audit to be focusing. I think the it of the personnel audit, like what is going to be done, still needs to be hashed out in terms of what it will be, how it will be accomplished, who will be doing this information, who will be executing this on our behalf, what the output would be, what the result, would look like if we're looking at, staffing and automation on two different levels. So that's something where the personnel committee, because it's, Sean is the administrative counterpart there, he can kind of say, hey, I found another district that did this, they used this consultant, or they did a little bit of work themselves and then brought somebody else in to mitigate some cost. I think that's where the finance committee decided to move it over to personnel because, not to say Jim isn't plugged into districts and knows what he's doing, but that's Sean's area to kind of figure out like what the it could be here. So it's a much more comprehensive look at the district from across the whole thing than just the administrative benchmarking that's also being done. That was my understanding.
Thank you.
Ms. White?
I guess I have a couple concerns. One is I'm just putting my teacher hat on and saying the stuff that teachers do, from their lesson planning to their making tests, grading tests, giving feedback, to me, that's nothing that can be automated. So I can see it for, finding ways. Let's say, I use special education, they have to collect data every single day. I could see it for that, maybe there's something for data collection, but for the actual day-to-day teaching, I'm not sure how that would work. But I also then think, again, like when you're saying determine if they're doing, what they should be doing. I would be more comfortable if there's a way to identify, maybe there are certain areas that a personnel audit can be involved in, but there's certain territories, and I kind of feel a little bit like when you're talking about the teachers, that should be more Ms. Fox, Mr. Syatt, Mr. Markarian, because they know the nitty-gritty of all the different teaching positions.
And I just, we don't know what we don't know, okay? Sean's not talking to every single, teacher all day long trying to figure out what's taking them the most time. My recommendation would be a very, very comprehensive survey that starts narrowing down the varying that would be completely confidential, but it would narrow down the various different areas gathering that data. Because from that, we can look through that data and really determine what the scope and where the opportunity is. But until we start this exercise, we're really not going to know. I mean, the teachers, maybe it's their grading, maybe it's a pain in the tail to enter their grading into Genesis. I don't know. I'm not going to state one way or another. But maybe there are things like that where they have their own spreadsheets. They can send it to, an email address and it populates automatically in Genesis. Again, I don't know how Genesis works, so please, I'm not saying that is something that's necessary, but I'm just saying, things like that. I can see a lot in the business office. I can see a lot in clerical. I can see a lot at data accumulation. There's a lot of areas that, I've seen work done on this stage for presentations that I think, could benefit from this. And I have to imagine if I'm seeing it on this stage, that it's throughout the district that there's opportunities to be able to leverage this.
Mr. Kidd?
So I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around all of this because it seems like I think what Tim was trying to say, there's different things being discussed here. So I think everyone here is all for, benchmarking and looking at our administrative structure, all the stuff that we were originally talking about. I think in terms of technology, I guess I'm also concerned because we just hired a new BA who's he's a tech guy, and I'm sure he has some ideas. He's been here, how many days, Joe? 5 days. So I'm sure that he's going to have suggestions for ways that we can improve processes, in the business office, facilities type stuff, all those types of areas. So I kind of feel like this might be separate projects, if we're talking about how to be more efficient, he can work on those areas with Alex, with technology and the areas that affect facilities and finance and stuff. And then in terms of the rest of the staff, I would like to hear from the BTEA leadership what teachers have been, I mean, they do their own surveys all the time. Like, what do they already think is an issue? I mean, when there's bad software, if people don't like Genesis or whatever, like, we hear about it. So what are the major areas of frustration for staff members? We know, like Jen said, you know, people having to do a lot of data entry in some of our special education programs. And so these are things that have come up, you know, in discussions before. And we've looked in, unfortunately, the software industry for education doesn't always have the most amazing software compared to, you know, in other realms of society, because a lot of stuff is New Jersey specific, and you know what I mean? And like, they don't make software for the whole country for certain things because they're specific to the laws and in certain states. I think we even talked about this when you came for your interview, Jim. So I really think this is such a general conversation, and it's very confusing, I think.
Well, I'll chime in a little bit. I think Ms. Light said it well when she said, we don't know, we don't know. From what you're describing, what I'm envisioning, and this is not my area of expertise, but it sounds like any potential consultant that we looped in would work very closely with Mr. Syatt, Mr. Raho, all the administration to kind of develop whatever plan is eventually proposed to the board, which, you know, nothing's approved yet. Obviously, we're a good ways away from that. So I think I'm hearing that everybody kind of feels it's at least a worthwhile exercise to get the personnel committee exploring this and exploring what consultants may or may not be out there, and what kind of input Mr. Rollo, Mr. Syatt, Mr. Marcari, Ms. Fox would have into it. Am I summarizing that in a good layman's terms, sort of understanding where we are in the process?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the key stakeholders are sitting on this stage, but there'd also be key stakeholders like, you know, Ms. O'Connell and data, you know, specific facilities people that are working, you know, for Mr. Rollo will probably need to have some input, but that's kind of the next step down the line. You know, so the first step could be something as simple as a very, very comprehensive personnel survey that just collects a ton of data, because you can definitely scale down the scope of this and find somebody if we're keying in on some key themes.
Well, then I would think the first step would be to put that survey you just mentioned on the personnel committee's agenda for the next meeting and start developing it.
Well, I think, you know, to go to personnel, I 100% agree with whether the survey is necessary. I mean, some of this information is collected through the budgeting process, right? Like, we go to the building principals and say, what is your building staff asking for? So there's some of this already collected in terms of, and then there's like the wish list items and things like that. So there's a lot of this that we have already that we do get requests for in the budget. So a good starting place might be there. And then if you feel like, you know, then you can go back to the building principals and say, was there other stuff discussed, or has there been other requests for things like that? So, but I'm just saying, like, to go to personnel to start that process, I don't think we have to instruct them to make a survey right away, but just, you know, start there and develop some strategy for what this is, it is.
To collate the information we already have, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, that's part of this whole process. You know, the whole process of something like this would collect data that is already readily available without disturbing the existing personnel, of course. So we'd want to do this in a way that minimizes it, but it is important exercise for that. And you know, the value of collecting a lot of this data, if we do this in kind of a confidential format so that, you know, and the survey is structured correctly, then we can also start collecting information, you know, that is affecting our retention issues and what people would like to see, you know, what are the teachers and the staff caring about, you know, to help further inform board decisions going forward.
Ms. White?
I just want to make sure I understand. So when we say we are going to survey or we're going to collect, is it they're going to, or is it a consultant? And
I think the first step is the board and the administration.
Okay, so that we don't have to decide whether we want to go the route of a consultant at this point.
No, I don't think we do. I think it would depend on what comes out of that survey as to how we would want to proceed going forward.
Do you want to jump in? Mr. Marcari?
So I just think that at this point, it sounds like we could refer this to the Personnel Committee to just even kind of develop the ideas a little bit more and report back, you know, having heard all the questions that a lot of board members have raised. Just have a conversation in Personnel Committee, talk about how this strategy might roll out. What kind of data do we already have? How might we approach getting more data? Do we need a consultant? If we do need a consultant, it takes a lot of work to figure out what the scope of work is that we're actually asking them to do, getting the input of our administrative team and also the teachers. You might even have a little subcommittee of teachers. What is the purpose of this? Why are we going to ask them all to fill out a survey about what they do every day? I think it's got a lot of potential value, but we're not going to solve it all here tonight. I think it's a good idea to send it to personnel, let them work on it, and kind of develop some ideas, come back and answer some more questions. The example that I thought of in listening to all this was, I think about, for example, attendance, taking daily attendance and managing the comings and goings of kids. I mean, that's a very labor-intensive activity. Maybe there's a way to put some automation in there that could have a cost to it, right? That would be an investment in potentially, scanners or more scanners or, taking advantage of student IDs or something like that. Those kinds of things, I think, give you like a really simple example of how something like this might create some efficiency. If that helps clarify one thing that might, we did this once with our substitute teacher service, right? We used to have a person that all they did was manually get substitutes assigned for staff when they were absent. We brought in a system that does that automatically, right? That created a lot of efficiency and allowed that position to become something different, and they were able to do work differently because they had an automated system helping them achieve a lot of tasks that were previously done by hand. So there's certainly precedent in the district for doing things like this, and I think we could formulate it a lot more by talking in committee.
Mr. Meany, you good with putting this on the next Personnel Committee agenda?
And I'd like to formally request to be able to attend that meeting, so if anybody would like to drop out so that I can help guide, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, that's going to bring us to the final item on our board forum, board governance, and I'm going to kick that over to Ms. McKeown.
Sure. So I did print out hard copies of this document, which I think the board members got in their weekly notes, but for anyone out there, I did not print millions of copies of it, but if you can go on your phone and look at it on the New Jersey School Boards Association website, so it's NJSBA. If you just Google NJSBA, who does what in public school governance, it should pop up. So if you want to look at it while we're talking, you can. So this is just like one of the shorter handouts that school boards gives at a lot of its trainings for school governance, and it's basically about the role of board members and superintendents. So it's trying to clarify who does what, because it's confusing. And we heard some commentary in some of the public comments and discussion about who's supposed to be doing what. We're not supposed to administer the schools. We're not supposed to tell people how to do their jobs, but we are overseeing. So it's a little bit confusing. And in this document, it actually, as one of the examples, gives budget development as one of the examples of where it can be a little bit confusing for people, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if anyone who had time to read it wants to kind of kick off, what they thought when they were looking through it. I feel like I've looked at it too many times throughout the years. I don't know if anyone has.
Just that I very recently went through the Governance 1 training, and we went over this document almost exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we strive to do as a school board is keep our purview to strategy 30,000 feet up and leave the tactics to the administration. I think sometimes there's overlap in those two things. Sometimes you do have to come down from the clouds and get onto a street level, but for the most part, I agree with that. Our job is to set a strategic vision for the district, and the administration's job is to carry out that strategic vision. Mr. Salmon.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Board members make policy and the administration executes it. I think the thing you said before, I'm a process guy. I'm right here with you. I think the process has, in the first few months, has broken down a little bit. And I wouldn't call that necessarily changing cultures and norms. I would just call that the normal kind of board functioning committee process. Like tonight, I think was a very good discussion about the personnel audit and what that was. And, we're going to try to refine it and then move forward in a methodical way, moving it over to personnel to have like the administrator in charge of that, kind of guide us here and do more due diligence on that. I like that process. It was deliberative, and it will be deliberative, so I don't have to go home and scream into my pillow tonight. But I think, you know, in terms of some things that have been happening recently, it's been a lot of rush, and this has to happen now, which I'm fine with if it's an emergency. Like we saw that during COVID. So I think the board being more nimble and being ready to make decisions on short-term notice, I'm fine with, as long as there's a reason for the kind of the emergency and not just like it's artificially created. So I would like to see, you know, kind of a more return to like what's happening now, and less kind of off-schedule meetings, less, you know, kind of like subgroup meetings just with Nick and talking about, you know, instruction rather than kind of like what's in weekly notes and how we get, you know, information to the whole board so that the whole board is kind of apprised of everything. Because I think that's one of the biggest things that I took away from my governance training is that you really don't want any surprises when anybody gets up here, right? Everybody, you know, gets the full minutes. That's why we're talking about amending the policy so that, you know, the full board, there's a timeline when the minutes go out to the full board so everybody knows, so that when we come up here and it's read out to the public, we all feel well informed, and it's a consistent message. Similarly, we developed a policy for when people write into the board. You know, we constructed a policy that if the, you know, an email comes to the whole board, then it would be the duty of the board president and or superintendent to respond to those. I'm not sure if that process is breaking down and we're having individual board members respond to emails or to the whole board. And the reason I personally don't like that is just that it doesn't let the whole board know what's going on, right? If we consolidate that and have, you know, a kind of unified response and unified voice, and I think that was the purpose of the policy, it just makes everybody feel more comfortable and like we're all on the same page. At least with regard to information access. With regard to how you feel about an issue, that's totally subjective. But at least if we're all talking at the same level because we all have the same information, then it's a much more robust process. It can be more deliberative, and I certainly appreciate it more. So I would like to hope that we return, you know, more to that kind of regular process of decision making and less kind of like ad hoc, feeling rushed decisions. Thank you.
Ms. Light.
I would actually kind of like to discuss board minutes because I would actually like to, you know, have the board minutes available to the public before the board meeting in which we're going to vote on any items or read out so that they have the opportunity to ask question on agenda items and be informed with what the discussions were. And obviously they would need to be redacted for confidential information, but that would be my request, to put that in the agenda minutes, or in the online where the agenda is.
Ms. White.
I have three different things. One, to respond to that, I'm not for or against it, but I would say that is different from what we just wrote in the policy for how the timeline for minutes. So if that is something that the full board wants, that needs to also go back to policy because we just wrote that, which is fine, and we can discuss that.
And we just sent that back to policy, so, yeah.
So the other thing is, I think what you saw last week was an example of the complete and utter frustration from people feeling that policy governance is not being followed. And, you know, I'm not going to get into the issue of who's voting which way with whom, 5 of this, 4 of that, it's irrelevant. But what I am going to say is we are always going to not all be on the same page. But we should never be in the position where groups of us have had conversations prior to the board and then an action is taken, because I'll say, we did feel blindsided. And that's just being 100% honest, because it was very clear that conversation had taken place that should have taken place at the full board level. So that's number one. Number two, you know, and one of the things it talks about is, it says an individual board member cannot make decisions for the board, take action for the board, or speak for the board unless the board has authorized them to do so. So I do have some concerns in terms of not following our protocol, which is it's either Mr. Markarian or the board president who responds to emails or makes phone calls to people who have sent emails and then not linking us all in. So when that happens, what happens is we don't know what's been said. And then you come to hear through word of mouth that there have been conversations, but we as a full board can't have a conversation about it if we didn't know that that took place. So I think that's something that we need to rein in, and we have a policy about it, and we either need to say, we agree, we've got this policy and we're going to follow it, or if we're not, and people are like, no, I want to be able to pick up the phone and call anybody, no, I want to be able to respond to any email, then we need to eliminate the policy and recognize that anybody can do that, and know when you have that sort of free-for-all, there is going to be misinformation that's spread, because we don't all necessarily live on the same page and have the same information. And then the last thing I want to say is, and it's in here, and I also want to say this out to the community, one of the things it says is the educational leader of the district, the superintendent, actively seeks opportunities to discuss the budget with the citizens, and along with board members, he or she talks with PTAs and PTOs about the district need. And that is something that Mr. Markarian is very good about doing when he has the superintendent's advisory meeting. And I want to just comment, because it came up earlier from a number of parents coming forward, feeling that they've been silenced or they've been accused of spreading misinformation, and asking us to openly acknowledge that that is not acceptable to any of us, that they should ever feel that if they question something or write a letter or post something that is their understanding of a situation, that we in any way are going to silence them. We may not like what you come forward and say every single time, and we may not all agree. Let's use the APs as an example. We may not all agree about that, but nobody, I can speak for the full board, I can't imagine anybody up here who would actively try to silence a community member from coming forward. And I would hope that nobody in the community who may feel differently would ever try to silence you. And it is 100%, I think we all would agree, anybody who's gotten threatening letters from anybody because you have spoken up, that's just wrong.
Anybody else? Somebody who hasn't gone? Ms. Chebek?
Yes, I just wanted to add that the off-schedule meeting that Mr. Salmon mentioned, I know only about two of them. One was the impromptu curriculum meeting in January, and I know that Ms. White feels very sorry about that one. That committee meeting was actually called by the superintendent. It wasn't the idea of the new board members or, going around or going sideways or whatever. The March 20th meeting last week, that was about the budget. That was the cause of actually not following the New Jersey School Board Association's summary, because this one clearly states that during the budgeting process, the superintendent collects all the data from the staff members 16 months earlier. Then the budgeting process is going to go around, and by December or January, the superintendent is ready to bring to the board with appropriate supporting information, final recommendations for a budget. So December and January, not March 11th. So having the off-schedule meeting last week on March 20th was actually needed and asked for by the board members, and it was the kindness and flexibility of the superintendent to accommodate that one. Also, this summary gives a little bit of a help how the decisions are being made by the board members regarding the budget. So the public input, the board members are considering the public input, the community's statements, and the superintendent's recommendations. But also it says that the board should look at the costs involved, the tax burden, and the effort on, the effect on the citizens' pocketbooks. And everything, we should reconcile everything to our best judgment, all the information that we collect. So it's not just one thing or one party, but everyone should be considered. And that's it. So this is a really great summary. I'm thankful that Ms. McKeon brought it for this meeting. All of us have read it. It's just a nice summary, and it's 8 pages, so not too long to go everyone through it. This is what I wanted to add to budget. Thank you.
Mr. Salmon.
I just want to clarify 2 things. So the January 20th Curriculum Committee meeting that was called off schedule was called because that was a Friday, and there was a proposal to put a voting item on the board agenda for the following Monday to convert the health curriculum into homework. So that was, I think, a good idea to have a, to have an emergency meeting. So I think Nick did the right thing there. The budget info that you recognize, that is the process. So I'm not speaking out of turn here, but we knew that obviously there was a new board coming in January that was going to be sworn in, and there wasn't really, at that time, I think I was the chair of the Finance Committee, but we really discussed kind of holding off on doing any concrete budget analysis work because we knew that there was new folks coming in that would have a distinctly, would have their own unique view of the budget and what to do there, which actually played out. So, but nevertheless, like all the expenses and revenue projections, I was all, given to the full board with the finance agenda that went out for the February 23rd meeting. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that, it wasn't a fault of the administration on the budget process that was decided with the previous board, knowing that a new board was, a large number of new board members were coming in.
And I think to be transparent too, the business administrator's office was down essentially 2 people. So I think it was a struggle. So I want to at least acknowledge that, they worked their tails off just to get that done. And I appreciate that. So thank you, Beth and Nick and everybody else related to that. I thank you again. And thank God Mr. Rollo is here.
Ms. McKeon?
I have 2 questions that I want to clarify before we take these policies back to the policy committee. But before I ask the board about those, I did want to also address some of the comments about people feeling silenced in the community. It's very upsetting to know that this is going on. Some of us have also gotten anonymous people saying things or posting things or writing to us, and letters and stuff like that too. So we sympathize, and I think it's terrible that anyone in our community feels that way. And I really hope that this behavior in our community can stop, because we keep talking about issues with the kids and HIB and stuff. If the adults can't behave, appropriately, we have a big problem. And I've said that before. So in terms of the policies, which a couple people just mentioned, we have to go back to the policy committee and come back with another draft for first reading. So I wanted to get some clarification, first of all, about publishing the minutes. We've talked about it over the years on the board a number of times. It has pros and cons, and one of the cons of publishing the minutes is it takes a little extra time because it has to be redacted. So if you have a meeting, for example, the finance meeting that just happened Thursday, if there wouldn't be time to get the minutes out to the full committee, have them edited, and redacted and posted in time, probably when the agenda goes out the next day. So there's a little time lag that might be involved. So, you know, I still think the pros might outweigh the cons of doing it, and I'm okay with publishing them, you know, but I want to make sure that there's enough board support for publishing them so we can make a new timeline guidelines. So I don't know if we want to take like an unofficial,
I just have a thought on that. Having just come back again from live school board training and talking to people from literally dozens of other districts, I am not opposed to publishing minutes, and this might be more of a cultural thing than how you got than a policy thing, but minutes to me are supposed to be more of synopsises rather than transcripts. And as people hear, and I know the historical reason for that, people wanted more and more information in the district. I think at a certain point it becomes, I don't know, it obscures the pure point of the minute. A synopsis form of minutes can always be read out at a meeting, and if board members have questions or the public has questions, can take a deeper dive then. I'm just for instance, you know, I took curriculum minutes from Milburn from October 21st. It's a couple paragraphs. It's a high-level synopsis. I mean, if we got to something like that, I have no problem publishing it. And again, that's more of a cultural thing. I realize that. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't think it's a policy question to say minutes can only be limited to this. But you know, I think it's more doable when minutes are how minutes are intended to be, which is a summary of a meeting rather than a transcript. That's just my thoughts on the matter. Ms. Hira.
Would this alleviate the concern or the need to read out these minutes?
Minutes, and somebody can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. Minutes need to be read out. I mean, I have not run into a school district yet that doesn't read out their minutes. I mean,
I think that we can provide more of a summary if we wanted to release more robust minutes for everybody to be able to read, and then we'd be able to read out a quick summary to call attention to maybe something that we wanted to discuss or an issue that was coming up.
Is it?
I'm sorry.
I just had a follow-up. I mean, I guess, is this something that perhaps we ask the community members, like what they would prefer? Because, I mean, they're the ones who sit here and listen to it.
Do you want less information?
Yeah, do you want transparency? I mean, that's where
Well, I mean, I would point out, I don't think having summarized minutes is not transparent. I mean, it's a best practice on how to take minutes. It's how minutes are taken in dozens of school districts across the state. So I don't think that's.
So the only thing I would say there is,
Yeah.
if I could just jump in quick, was I personally like the detailed minutes because it's a record that you can go back to and understand like what actually happened. So for example, like on the textbook discussion, like it was good to have the minutes to see like what the concern was rather than there were concerns, right? So like if they, you know, because then that led to Mr. Terry coming back and talking about those concerns. So like it was good for, I think, the full board to know it, and it was good for Mr. Terry to have it so that he could come back and say like, okay, these were the concerns, this is what I looked at, like I had a record of what it was rather than just there were concerns. So I guess I kind of like the idea of just keeping it. Plus, like realistically, like the reading of minutes is not the bulk of our meeting time. You know, like are we trying to solve a problem that, you know, doesn't really exist by cutting down reporting out minutes? I mean, it's, you know, it's public comment, board forum, discussion, that's what takes up the bulk of the meeting, right?
Ms. White.
So I guess it's how you look at what the minutes are for, and I have always, in all my years, thought of them as a way to be informed on the committees that I'm not a member of. So when you go to just that very short, you know, paragraph, that really doesn't tell you about all the discussion that has taken place. Then if you do something like just a summary, that's kind of subjective because you're deciding as an individual what you think are the most important things to summarize, whereas I might think something else is more important and should be there. So my personal preference, and look, it takes hours. You know, I just worked on them today. It takes hours to write the minutes, and I get that. But I think the benefits of, it's all about keeping us all in the loop, keeping us all informed about all of the discussions. And to me, that is what the goal is for first of us all here, and then for us sharing it out with the community. I think once you start to have that very short thing, we go back to the days, and I can remember sitting in the audience and hearing people coming forward and saying, your minutes are not detailed in the least. I don't understand what's going on. What is going on in this subject? What is going on in this, you know, like, and so that's why, I mean, I remember Mr. Burns, you know, meeting after meeting, he would say, you know, we need more details. And so as a request from the community, that's why we did start getting more and more detailed. And then once I moved from the audience up to this table and I had a different role, I really appreciate that information. I mean, that's also why, quite frankly, I knew to reach out to Kirsten and say, I have some questions. If she hadn't had that in the report, it might just have been a summary that I might not have seen that and been able to prepare questions to ask. So I do think, yes, it does take time. Yes, it is, you know, it makes the meeting longer, but I think the benefits outweigh it. So just the question then becomes, what do we do in terms of, you do also include, quite frankly, confidential information in, or things that we might have a teacher or an administrator come and give us a heads up about that might be something that we share in our minutes, but is not something that's ready because it's not a final decision or it's still in the works that you don't want in, you know, posted on the website. So I guess we have to talk about, if we do post, you know, what kind of information is redacted and what's the time frame that it gets redacted. And I understand to some degree, you know, the community saying, well, maybe it would be helpful to have it beforehand, but it also might be more beneficial for us to see it, hear it first, and then post it. You can always ask questions at a follow-up meeting, but that just gives a longer timeline in terms of who's writing the minutes, who's sharing the minutes out, giving, you know, time for it to be redacted before it's posted. Otherwise, we're going back to that very rushed, you know, pace that we just made the new policy about to avoid that rushed pace.
Well, I appreciate the same thing. Like, I appreciate being able to read the minutes, refer back to them, getting that detail, understanding what the questions are, understanding what the follow-up items are. You know, that's how I personally write my minutes. But I also have started, you know, in anticipation of this possibly happening, trying to provide Nick with both a redacted copy and an unredacted copy to save time related to it. You know, so I think, you know, policy should hash out the details of what makes sense and then bring it to the board for a vote, and I'm open to that. But I would like to be able to share at some point the minutes on our website so that the public has easy accessibility, because when you think about it, you know, we're having people ask for minutes, and I think that it will save time for the administration and for everybody else answering the emails, because they can just go right on and get that, and we are transparent.
Mr. Rashio.
I'm confused. Don't we just read out the redacted minutes anyway? Or isn't that what we read out? Yeah. So we just post online what we read out ahead of time. Right? Right.
They're not like physically redacted because there's no like black block in the minutes that we're reading out, right?
Right.
We can see it, but we can put that it's fairly very easy.
Right? So we have some different views on it, and you know, we have to hash it out in policy thing. But maybe one potential compromise that, you know, full credit to Mr. Markarian was, you want to say what you suggested?
Yeah, I mean, I think what historically Ms. White was kind of sharing was this, you know, one end of the spectrum where we had, you know, a desire for people to provide more information about what happened during a committee meeting discussion, and so the minutes got, you know, lengthier and then reported out for the public for this very reason of trying to provide information for the public, you know. But at the same time, you know, there's some, I'm hearing some sentiment like, when I report out, perhaps I don't want to read it verbatim. And I can understand if you've provided the actual document that you're reading out loud in advance of the meeting, that does kind of question why you have to read it out word for word. And I can understand people saying, wait a minute, we just gave this to everybody on like the Wednesday or the Thursday before a board meeting. Why am I going to read it out verbatim? Why can't I do a summary of what I thought was the most important items? And obviously, at that point, the community, in addition to the whole board, would already have the minutes detailed. So I understand that. And that kind of represents sort of a balance between two extremes. One extreme being, you know, having really short verbal reports versus really long verbal reports. You know, if you go with, hey, let's maintain the detail that we like to have, because it gives us all kind of a record of what happened and it helps us remember. Because as you go from one meeting to the next year after year, it's really nice to be able to look back at minutes that actually tell a story, and they're not just a couple paragraphs that are so summary, you don't really necessarily remember the rationale and the thinking, plus it kind of gives you a little bit of a to-do list record to look back on as well. So I think the way board members have been writing the minutes is great. I think really even new board members that haven't been writing minutes for the board very long are writing great minutes. So I really appreciate the effort you guys put into the minutes. I think they're at an appropriate level and they're really helpful. And I don't see any reason that it's a problem to provide in the community as long as you do whatever redactions are necessary. And then if you have that out there and everyone's got it, and you want to perhaps be a little bit more concise in a public report, it shouldn't be anything lost because everybody has them in advance. So it would give you, I think, more flexibility. If you want to read them in detail because you think everything that happened at that meeting is really important to orate at the meeting, nothing's stopping the chair from doing that, right? If you want to be a little bit more concise and pick out a couple items, you're not going to hurt anybody because everybody's got the document in advance. So it would give you flexibility to kind of, monitor and adjust as in terms of how you read out the minutes. So if that sounds reasonable, I would suggest that would help the policy committee go at this with some direction. The second thing I would say is the policy committee needs to know or can work on this timeline issue, right? Because we're trying not to make this super frantic. On the other hand, there are times, I think, where board members have definitely expressed to me in various contexts with various chairs, depending on what the hot issue of the moment is, they really want to report out quickly as soon as possible at the next board meeting. And so we need to at least have something in the policy that captures that. But there should be, I think, personally, there should be a minimum time by which we get those minutes to everyone before reporting. And I think the policy committee just has to try to figure that out. I mean, we talked about the Wednesday before board meeting. That seems reasonable. On the other hand, if you really want to push it, you could probably push it to Friday if you really felt the need to. So maybe we word something in there that, the goal is to get the minutes out by the Wednesday. If you're really pressed on an important issue, just make sure you get it done by Friday at least so people have a chance to read it. That does create that Monday frenzy sometimes of questions and phone calls, but if there's something really important going on, that's fine, I get it. That's not that big a deal. So those would be the two things I think we need to work on, would be the timeline, and as far as the committee meet, just making a decision and just asking the public for their patience until the board gets this policy sorted out. The status quo remains, if that's okay. Until we get a final policy on this. I think that would be nice, just so I know if we start getting questions, because I really don't want to have to go back into the past and start redacting minutes and posting them on the webpage. That's a lot of work and takes a lot of time. So
I think it should be prospective.
Yeah, if you guys are good with that, just to kind of make that clear, so I appreciate that. But I think we can certainly make this work as an option, and it's not a big deal to add it. We could just post it where we have, board meeting minutes. We can put the board committee minutes. The only other thing is, like, procedurally, we from a timing perspective, we don't post meeting minutes for Board of Ed meetings until after the Board of Ed meeting that they have been approved and authorized by the board. This would require that we just treat committee meeting minutes differently. They don't go through a formal Board of Ed review process before they get posted. They just go through the committee process before they're posted. Now, if somebody, after the fact gets them and says, I don't remember it that way, I mean, we could deal with that, but I don't want to get it bogged down into constantly trying to keep up with board approvals on committee meeting minutes. And that'll also slow down when you feel comfortable posting them for the public. So I would say if that question comes up, we're not going to do that process I'm not going to recommend that process for committee meeting minutes because it's going to really slow you down and you want to get them out before the board meeting. So, but if you guys like those ideas, we'll work on it in policy.
I think that that's appropriate.
Ms. Here?
I kind of like the suggestion of making it more comprehensive online and, again, a little bit more streamlined at the meetings. Personally, I think that would be great. I mean, that's just me. I also don't chair a committee, so, knock yourself out if it takes you 5 hours to do it. But also as somebody who was the chair of the policy, I would say that I think it's helpful if you attach to the minutes, especially if you're going to post it, kind of like this. So it's easily accessible. These are the policies that we're looking at. These are the changes. Because as I sat out here and I read it, to me, it's like, oof, this is like going over my head to some extent. It doesn't make sense. Like, I think if they could read, like in red, like this is what the changes are, it's helpful.
Yeah, we can give them for the policy committee, we can include the Strauss Esme summary, like the alert, because that's really basically the minutes and explains why you're doing all those policy changes in the first place. So, and that's easy to include.
So is the board all in favor of us coming up with a set policy to find a way to make a timeline?
I think we can
Okay.
put that on the agenda
Okay.
for policy.
And we don't want it to be like Nick has to redact on Friday nights when he's trying to write his SOS and
No,
weekly
no,
notes. So we have to have a reasonable timeline that works, right?
If it's important, I don't mind.
I know, but you shouldn't have to do that. Okay, so the other policy that we didn't do for first reading yet is the one on email, and I think Jen had brought up when we were talking about governance, like, is this the way we want the policy to be? Because, like, right now we have, I think, a variety of different things going on in terms of whether board members are CCing the whole board or responding to emails and stuff like that when it comes to the board. And I think we changed the auto, like, not the auto thing, on our website, I think it says board emails sent to individual board members will be forwarded to the whole board, but then there's also the what do we do when the whole board gets an email, who's responding to it?
Right now, you're right. Individual emails sent to an individual board member get responded to with the whole board looped in. Emails sent to the whole board get responded to by Nick or myself, or someone designated by us to do it. So that's where it stands right now.
Yeah, as long as, I think that to take work off you and Nick too, leverage your committee chair people to be able to answer appropriate topics that come up on the various different committee chairs so that you don't have to be answering everything at all hours of the night.
I'm not necessarily, yes, Mr. Salmon.
Yeah, I think for me that I don't really care who responds as long as just the full board is captured on the response. That's the salient point for me, is just when you respond to somebody who wrote to the board, just copy the whole board on your response so everybody knows what you said and we're all on the same page.
Personally, I don't think I would have a problem with committee heads responding to things that fall under their purview. And when there's a little bit of a question about it, we can work that out internally on who's going to send it. But I think that's a worthwhile thing to send back to policy.
I mean, we had that for a while, years ago, where the board president and the superintendent would designate for certain emails to the committee chairs, and then they would always, I think they might have shared their response but with the board president and superintendent before they sent it, but then they didn't have to write them all. You know what I mean?
Well, we might not even need a new policy then, because it's already in there that we can designate.
Yeah, we can designate people.
Yeah, okay. So we'll get to that. Mr. Amin.
I'm not sure I'm following or I agree. I don't view those types of emails any different than somebody walking down my street and saying, hey, Nimish, I want to talk to you about this going on, and I have that conversation. I have it with friends, I have it with colleagues, I have it with other coaches, other parents. If there's a substantive response, absolutely agree that, hey, this is what the board is planning or something, completely agree. But if somebody emails the board and says, these 8 different things, and I want to find out more information about what they were saying, especially if it relates to me, I'm not viewing that as any different than me having a casual conversation with hundreds of people in town.
Mr. Salmon.
I think the difference to me is that, and I'm not like, I don't want to quell your soccer sideline conversations. I think the difference is when somebody emails the whole board, they're expecting a response from the board on behalf of the board. So if you just wrote an email back and said, hey, I know what's going on with this, and the softball field's going to have this, and we're going to do this for the personnel audit or whatever, then it's nobody from the board got that information, got that response. If somebody's just coming up to you and saying, hey, when's your next board meeting, totally procedural, nuts and bolts, that's fine, that doesn't matter. But when somebody emails the whole board, I think that they're expecting a board response, and when you do respond to an email to the board, it can be perceived as this is a response from the board, even if it's just you, because you're from the board. That's how I would view it if I was emailing the board. Like if somebody just responded to me or just called me up and said, hey, we got your email, this is what's going on, I'd say, oh, okay, this is from the board. But then not the rest of the board knows what the substance of that conversation was.
Yep, no, completely agree. I was thinking of it more in the scenario of, hey, here's 17 different things that the board did wrong. I don't understand 12 of them. Hey, thank you for your email. I want to understand a little bit more about this. And then you have a conversation, hey, this is just me talking, I'm not speaking for the whole board. That's the soccer conversation.
Ms. White.
Okay. And this may be what you're trying to say down there. So I think, again, the frustration comes in when individuals have conversations either via email, by phone, whatever, and we're all not looped in. Because as it says in governance, and is that you can't speak as you can't represent the full board, right? Unless the full board has said, this is fact, this is how we feel, this is what we're doing. Now that's not to say, and we all have experiences, whether it's the soccer field or the drama production, where somebody might ask you a question. That's, and you say, I can listen to you, I can give you my opinion perhaps as an individual, but I can't speak as a board member because I am one person of 9. I think we have to be really careful when you get into saying, well, I'm just going to respond to an email, because that's when we have the trouble where misinformation is being put out there. I think that the reason that there is the policy in terms of either it's Mr. Markarian or the board president, and it used to be a chair, if something came to curriculum, when I was curriculum, I would respond and say to Ms. Fox and Mr. Markarian, would you like me to respond? If they said yes, I would write a response, I'd share it with them. Is this what you want me to say? And they might say, oh, add this, take this out, put it this. But so there was that second and third eyes to make sure the information that was being sent to whatever community member was accurate, was truthful, was representative of the board and not an individual position. And I'm more in favor of continuing to do it that way, because I think that that will really put a lot of upset among individuals to bed, and it will also keep individuals getting actual facts when it's done that way.
But I'm still not sure I understand how that's different than getting community input throughout everyday experiences. I think we should get community input, we should be open to it.
Well, I'm not saying you can't get, but when somebody writes an email, let's use the softball field, okay? When somebody writes an email.
So let me just finish my thought. So getting community input includes follow-up questions. What do you mean by this? And I think it's clear to most people that one of us is not speaking for the board. We can say, well, this is what I think. This is what we think. That's a good point. We should have the board discuss this. I think what I'm hearing you suggest, and you may not be, is we kind of draw this wall between us and everybody else, and I'm saying we should encourage more input, we should encourage more feedback, we should have more discussions.
I'm not against discussion, but I do think that, and as I was saying, with the softball situation, okay, we've gotten some letters about it. So if one person were to write back about that, we haven't even discussed the softball field as a full board because we don't have all the information yet. So I don't think that that's fair to the full board, and I don't think it's fair to whoever's sending a letter about that for an individual to be responding. I think that's the kind of thing where you have to go to Mr. Markarian and to Keith and say, I think that this is something that, we need to have some sort of response to people who are writing in about this topic. I think that that's something that has to be agreed upon. I don't think it should, this is me, my opinion. You're welcome to your own, but I don't think it's the same thing as getting community input. Community input is, we now have talked about these things at board forum. When we have our next meeting, anybody who's watching, anybody who's here could come up at non-agenda items and give feedback on what we've talked about. That's getting community input. An individual responding to an email, an individual making a phone call is not getting community feedback. It's taking it to a level that's, in my opinion, not part of what the rules tell us that we should be doing. And I'm a rule follower, so if the rule says to me, Mr. Molinari and Mr. Markarian are the ones that are supposed to do this, I'm going to follow those rules. But if you're saying, as the full 9 of us, you don't want those rules followed, then we all have to be able to respond in the same way. So what I'm saying is we all either need to agree on this or change the policy.
No, go Larry.
I guess I've been guilty of it, right? People will email in and I'll say, hey, give me a call. Let's talk about these issues. Never responding for the whole board. So I encourage open discussion. And I also look at the timeline. If somebody sends an email on a Tuesday and it's not replied to by a Thursday, and it's something that I know about or I have an opinion about, I'll say, give me a call. And I will talk to them offline. I'll certainly change my, my methodology on that. But I think it's a positive, personally. I've spoken to, a few people who have come up to speak at the mic, and I've gotten their information and I've called them. I said, hey, I just want to follow up with some of these comments. I mean, if that's wrong, then I'll certainly curtail that behavior. But I think it's been I personally think it's been a positive. So, and it's like you said, drawing that wall. I just look at the time frame. If it's 2 or 3 days, you can't just let people go.
So,
Mr. Salmon.
I agree. I mean, I think like you're an elected official, so you should be available to the public, right? I just think it's different, and the policy kind of delineates it this way. If somebody emails the full board, then the full board should respond as a board. So that's why it's designated as Nick or the board president. But then it also talks about like if you get an individual email to your board email, then if it's substantively about school business, forward it up to Nick so he's in the loop, right? So it's really just about like when you do that, I'm not like castigating you or anything, but like when you do that, does Nick know what you're saying? How does he know what you've said? Like, not that you're like making promises or like, saying, Yankee Stadium's coming to Ridge High School, but like, that's kind of the part of it is, how does he know what you've said to that parent? And when that parent comes in and says, I got an email or I talked to Larry, like, Nick, what do you think about what he said? So it's really just for consistency. It's not, I think it's really about when somebody it's the sender and receiver. When somebody emails the full board, they want a response from the board or on behalf of the board. When somebody sees you on the sideline of a soccer game, they know you're just there as a parent, right? So they understand, like, I'm not expecting like to your point, like I'm not expecting a response from the full board. But if they bring something up to you and you're like, oh, this is substantive, I should kind of fly this up the flagpole. That's what the policy is kind of meant to capture, so that really, one, the entire board knows the responses on behalf of the board, and number two, so that Nick and the rest of the administration are always in the loop about what the further input is that you got, because maybe they're elucidating some of the issues that the 17 list. You went and got some information. It's good to have Nick have that information as well, so that he could filter it back to whatever personnel need to know it in the district. So I think from that aspect, I think that the policy really tries to delineate that, full board versus individual board member versus like your personal email, right? Which if you get an email through your personal email and somebody says, hey, I know you're on the board, what's going on with the drainage situation, that's something you could fly the flagpole, or subject to the policy, you can make your own decision based on that, right? So if it's something non-substantive, maybe you can just respond. If it's not, then you might want to forward it on to Nick and Keith to take a look at, so that they can figure out, how do we loop the whole board in here?
Just remember, when you're on the sidelines, disclaimer, I am speaking as personal resident.
I think, joking aside, that's the substance, right? We have to make sure that there's no misunderstanding that any information we are providing is on behalf of the board. I think that's the needle we have to thread here, because the two balancing priorities we have to make sure we are addressing is being available to the public for feedback and for providing our thoughts, and not speaking on behalf of the board. And I think those we just have to use.
And the third one is information accuracy, right?
Absolutely,
So, yeah.
absolutely. And yes, I can't speak about drainage issues, so I wouldn't even try, but I get your point. If it's very substantive, I'll look at some emails, I'm like, all right, Nick or facilities or somebody has to respond to this. If it's, hey, what was that motion about? Well, this is what the motion was about from my perspective.
I'm afraid to say this because some people might get mad at me. So 15 years ago, there was a one Board of Ed email address listed on the boards that board, 15 years ago, you could email the entire board, and then the board president and superintendent answered it, and our phone numbers are listed. People could call us, and we could get community input on the telephone, which, is a little safer because it's not operable. I mean, really, this is what we're talking about, putting stuff on an official board email. It's now, official, and it's like out there and stuff, right? So putting anything in writing, it's there. It doesn't matter if it's in a text. It's like somewhat dangerous, right? So like I think the intent of this policy was with all the things you just discussed, right? Accurate information, all that stuff, and everyone knowing what's going on. But there's also some liability if board members are running amok and writing crazy things or something, which I'm not saying anyone did. But, if community members want to talk to board members, they can find us on the soccer field. They hunt us down in the school directories and text us. I mean, they're going to find you if they want to talk to you. But some people don't know. They might not have a kid at the school. They don't all have our cell numbers, and not everyone's on Facebook, right, Tim? So, there are other ways to make ourselves available, besides, this issue with the email. I think, I do have concerns if the emailing becomes a free-for-all, like what Jen said.
For the record, I don't want people finding me when I'm on vacation. I just don't, I'm good there. But just as a temperature, are we good with utilizing existing policies to let the committee chairs respond to emails that come into the full board under their domain, and the rest following the policies as is, or do we have to discuss that some more as far as ones that go to individual board members?
I think if the committee chair says, hey, Nick or Keith, I'm going to reply to this, and everybody knows that the committee chair is going to reply, I personally would think it's fine. You don't just,
All right.
So
I still think it's fine for the committee chair, but I still think you should run it by whoever if it's curriculum, you check with Ms. Fox. If it's wellness, you check with, just for accuracy and to make sure you're not saying something that they aren't comfortable with you're saying. I think having that layer in, if we're going to go to this, it protects everybody.
So just the way the policy actually reads, right now, right, if the email sent to the full board, the current wording says that the email will only be responded to by the superintendent and or board president or someone designated by the superintendent or board president, such as another administrator, a board committee chair, may be asked to respond on certain topics. So the idea is that Keith and I have to quarterback the responses and say, okay, hey, Larry, this sounds like a facilities and operations thing. Do you mind, shooting this person an email? Just copy the whole board, and then, I mean, to Jen's point, that idea of, talking to maybe the administrator that co-chairs the committee with you and having a quick conversation. Is this right? Yeah, this is what we agreed on. I just want to make sure I get it right. I mean, something like that, I think, is all that's being said there. And that's for emails sent to the full board, and then it's a slightly different sentence for emails that are sent to individual board members. But again, the reason is there. If it's sent to an individual board member to their Board of Ed email address, right? That's very key because we put a lot of thought into this process in terms of now you're creating that official Board of Ed email record, right? Because it's a Board of Ed email address. So please forward that to the superintendent. And then same thing, so that the superintendent or someone designated by the superintendent can respond, even if it was sent to you as an individual board member at the BOE email address. And then again, same thing, copy the board on the response, because everybody wants to know what's on people's minds. If they're concerned enough about it to write the board an email, then we want to make sure all the board members understand what their concern is, and all the Board of Ed members are informed on what the response was. And then the third tier is somebody emails you to a private Board of Ed email address, and now you've got to deal with this legal aspect of, okay, how am I going to respond to this as an individual board member? I got a private email. What do I do with it? It's sent to my home email address at comcast.net. How do I approach that? And then board members have to be aware of like ethics issues and writing the disclaimer, and this is just my individual opinion, or maybe they pick up the phone and have a call with the person. And to follow up on Larry's point, I think it's that in all of this stuff with responding to emails and trying to keep everybody equally informed and making everyone feel like these 4 people do on the board governance page here. There's 4 people smiling very broadly on this document if you didn't look it up. To feel like that, right, there's that natural, like, I want to be a human being and talk to other human beings about what's going on. which is like, you know, what you're getting at, like, hey, I want to just talk to a person. Like, let's not forget that that's okay too, right? But it's just sort of that, you know, being judicious and remembering that, you know, that conversation is really not speaking as a representative of the board majority opinion on a specific issue. So the idea might be, hey, I'm the chair of whatever, finance or policy, and I talk to Nick or whomever, I write an email, I copy the whole board, and I, say to, Nick or whomever, hey, I want to follow up this person and just get a pulse of what they're thinking. I want to give them a call. So give them a call. Be a person, that's fine. But when you're creating these documents, especially in your Board of Ed email address, it's that awareness that let's get everybody informed. And then you have that maybe, soccer field, grocery store, whatever conversation on the phone, and you get a sense of what somebody's real concern might be, that maybe it didn't come through in the email or whatever. And you want to share that with me and let the board develop a sense of awareness of what a real concern somebody has is. And you don't want to lose that human element of interacting with human beings, because, not for nothing, in my experience, it's a lot more enjoyable than email, if you can actually have a conversation, if you can. So I don't want people to feel like they can't do that, but at the same time, it's that responsibility of this documentation that goes on as soon as you write something that has @bernardsboe.com, and that responsibility to create smiling, happy board members that are all equally informed about everything. So that's the challenge.
Okay, just my last 2 cents, and also, we're all elected officials. We all have common sense, right? So somebody writes in and says, Mr. Rascio, thank you for initiating the softball field repair. My daughter had a great season. I think you can say thank you without checking with the administration, right? But more complex questions. I mean, me and John have had quite a few crafting email sessions already in just the last 2 months. So we're all judicious enough not to have to codify that, I think. Is there any more discussion on this? All right, move to close the meeting. Ms. Slight, Mr. Salmon? All in favor? And it was 5 minutes shorter than last week, so we're getting better every time, just for the record.